Chapter 881. Ning Xiaoma was shocked and almost jumped up. She turned around in the water and said, "You." However, when she turned around halfway, a hand was placed on her shoulder and said, "Don't move. Do you want me to look in front of you?" Ning Xiaoma was speechless. She wanted to cry. "Master, Almighty, can you let me have a good bath?" "Master." She reminded him of his identity again. She wanted to say something, but the heat immediately hit her and made her choke on her words. She hurriedly channeled her energy again. "Good girl." Shun Julie's voice was still slow. "I'll help you channel your energy. Don't be distracted again." His palm was pressed against her bare back, and a wisp of cold air entered Xiuma's body, helping her to resist the scorching heat. With him channeling his energy behind her back, Xiuma could finally speak. "Almighty, I can actually take a bath by myself. You can go ahead first if you have something to do." He was also in the water, and his body was very close to hers. She could even smell the unique light fragrance on his body. His palm was pressed on her back, making her inexplicably nervous and her heart beat faster. "Me?" he repeated, and his voice was slightly higher at the end. He added, "Although I'm very busy, you're too easy to get into trouble. I'm afraid that once I turn around, you'll be dizzy again. So, no matter how busy I am, I can only stay here and watch." Ning Xiaoma was speechless. She looked at her naked body and thought about the scenery behind her back. She was a little confused. "Master, we shouldn't touch each other, let alone look at each other's naked bodies." "Ah." Dizun responded and shamelessly asked, "What do you mean by don't touch each other?" He was so knowledgeable. How could he not know what don't touch each other meant? Ning Xiaoma was speechless. She gritted her teeth and said, "It means that men and women can't have physical contact. Even if they pass something to each other, they can't touch each other's skin." "I see." The ancestor acted as if he had just been taught a lesson. Suddenly, a brocade handkerchief appeared out of nowhere and placed it under his palm. "All right, let's not touch each other." Ning Xiaoma. She almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Why didn't she realize that the usually lofty ancestor was so thick-skinned? "Master, have you always taught your disciples like this?" Ning Xiaoma secretly gritted her teeth. She was being teased by her cold master at that. "You're an exception," Shun Julie answered indifferently and added, "After all, you are the only one who is destined to be alone. You are the only one who became a concubine first, and then a disciple." "Master, I remember that you hate relationships between master and disciple." Ning Xiaoma reminded him. "Yes, I didn't like it at first." The ancestor answered honestly. That was just how he was. Even when he didn't care, he would still abide by the rules of the secular world. But once he cared, all the rules in this world were fleeting clouds to him. Ning Xiaoma understood the meaning behind his words. "Master, do you mean that you like her now? When I meet a suitable disciple, it's not a bad idea to have a relationship between master and disciple." Shun Julie answered naturally, as if he was eating cabbage. "Ning Xiaoma?" Her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't understand the Almighty's thoughts. "Almighty, a relationship between master and disciple is taboo. Aren't you afraid of being criticized by the world?" "I do my own thing. Who has time to care about other people's mouths?" Shun Julie asked back. Chapter 882. The ancestor had never cared about what the world thought of him. He had done many shocking things in the past. However, he had the halo of the great god. No matter what he did, the world would think that he had a deeper meaning. The more they couldn't figure him out, the more mysterious he was. This was the culture of the strong. Once one stood at the top, the world could only worship him. Even the most outrageous things could be beautified, therefore, he added, "Who dares to gossip about me?" Ning Xiaoma said, "They naturally don't dare to gossip about you. But has the great god ever thought about my reputation? My reputation on this continent is already very bad. Trash, jinx, and maybe in the future, there will be a vixen who seduced my master." "Wrong," Shun Jili corrected her. "It should be a vixen who was seduced by my master." Ning Xiaoma said, "Isn't it the same? Great god, don't care about those small details, okay?" "Xiaoma, do you agree?" Shun Jili pressed his palms on her back. He was channeling energy for her while chatting with her. "Ah." Agree to what? Ning Shuama was a little confused. Shun Juli's lips curved slightly behind her, and he said 3 words, a master-disciple relationship. Ning Shuama's heart skipped a beat. When did she agree to it? Where did this conclusion come from? As if he sensed Ning Shuama's thoughts, Shun Juli spoke again. You're thinking about the impact and consequences of a master-disciple relationship. This proves that you have me in your heart and want to be in a relationship with me. Ning Shuama was stunned. The great god's reasoning was so intrepid. She subconsciously said, Great God, you think too much. I don't want a master-disciple relationship. A master-disciple relationship was so bitter. The master was cold, and the disciple was humble. Maybe the master would even stab the disciple a few times for the sake of the world. As for Shun Juli, he was a true god and also the representative of Emperor Gaolong. If she fell in love with him, wouldn't she be tortured to death? No, in those sadomasochistic novels about master and disciple relationships, there was no such thing as a cold master flirting with his disciple almighty. Why didn't you take the conventional route? You're making me lose my sense of direction, so you haven't thought about this. Shun Juli's voice was still steady. You don't have to think about it, just do it in the future. Ning Shuama was speechless. She couldn't help but look back at Shun Juli. Shun Juli's hand was still on her back. He lowered his eyes and looked at her. His expression was calm, and his bearing was noble. After she looked at him a few more times, he slowly said, What are you looking at? Are you really a god? Ning Shuama felt as if he had been possessed by Rong Yuetian. His style seemed different from usual. Shun Juli smiled faintly. What do you think? Well, although the style was different, she could be sure that it was him. It wasn't because of the appearance, but because of the feeling. Her feelings had always been accurate. She was stubborn. It looks fake. After all, you have a substitute. Do you think I'm still a substitute? Shun Juli narrowed his eyes dangerously. That's hard to say. Ning Shuama purposely angered him. However, as soon as she finished speaking, her body was suddenly pulled by a force. She couldn't help but fall back into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her slightly opened red lips. The familiar breath that made her heart palpitate rushed to her face. Ning Shuama was forced to tilt her head back slightly. He fixed one hand on her waist and the other hand on her chin. He kissed her thoroughly. Chapter 883. Ning Shuama's head exploded. She wanted to struggle and push him away, but her hands were powerless. Her heart was beating like a drum, and her body was weak. She almost collapsed in his arms. His kiss seemed to have a hallucinogenic effect. Ning Shuama's usually smart brain went blank, and she couldn't remember anything for a while. This passionate kiss lasted for a long time. After about 5 to 6 minutes, the sound of water splashing could be heard. Finally, Ning Shuama was startled back to her senses. Then, she realized what kind of scene she was in. She bent her body like a bow, which inevitably exposed her chest. At this moment, she was naked. When he kissed her, his eyes must have taken advantage of her tofu. This position, that scene was too beautiful. She didn't dare to imagine it. God! Too bold and unrestrained. Especially when one of his arms was still around her waist, and his palm was pressed on her lower abdomen. His little finger was slightly lower and had already touched a mysterious area. Bang! Ning Shuama's face turned red. She pushed him away and wanted to push him away again, but with her current strength, she was no match for him. Not only did she not push him away, but she also fell into his arms. Shema! The Dizun hugged her tightly. There seemed to be a faint flame in the depths of his eyes. The eyes of the girl in his arms were watery. Her face was red, and her lips were moist like cherry blossoms. He didn't know if it was because she was soaking in the hot spring water or because she was nervous and shy, but her whole body was pale pink. Her skin was like fine porcelain, smooth to the touch. She was lying in his arms like this. Even if Lu Xiaohui was alive, he would not be able to control himself. Shun Juli's palms suddenly became hot. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pressed her tightly against his body. Xian. His voice was slightly hoarse. Although he was still wearing a robe, Ning Shuama was still in his arms and could feel the obvious changes in his body. God, he wouldn't want to take her here, right? Ning Shuama's face became hotter, and her heart became more flustered. She couldn't help but struggle. Shinjuli's breathing became heavier when she did not move. "Don't move," he shouted. His body was burning hot. Ning Xuema was in his arms, and her face was even hotter. Fortunately, he seemed to be naturally adapted to the hot spring. Xuema lay in his arms and could no longer feel the heat of the hot spring, but her heart felt like it was about to jump out. "Let me go first." She had originally wanted to reprimand him, but in the end, not only did her voice sound a little hoarse, it also trembled as if she was acting coquettishly. Ning Xuema was also stunned when she said it herself, and her face became hot again. Shinjuli coughed and attributed his abnormal behavior to the fact that she was not wearing clothes and was not as confident as usual. "Xuema, hurry up and level up." Shinjuli's breathing was somewhat unstable. He was born without any desires, but he did not expect that after he met her, he would have the desire of a normal man. He wanted to have her, he wanted to rub her into his body. That kind of desire was something he had never experienced before. However, there was an inexplicable familiar feeling that made him dazed for a moment. In his life, he rarely controlled his emotions. He was more carefree and did whatever he wanted. Basically, he would do whatever he wanted and would not let himself suffer. But now, he had to control himself. For the sake of the future, he had to control himself. Shinjuli secretly took a breath. Chapter 884. Shinjuli finally let go of her, but he was afraid that she would jump up from the heat again, so he slid his palm on his Xuema's back. "Be obedient and adjust your breathing according to my instructions. It will be very beneficial for you." After experiencing such a passionate kiss and a hot hug, Ning Xuema felt that his presence was even stronger now that he was behind her, especially when his palm was still burning, and the warmth seemed to be directly transmitted to her heart. "Great God, I can do it myself." Ning Xuema wanted him to leave. "Stop talking nonsense. With me here, you'll be able to adapt faster." The ancestor regained his calm tone. He was used to being high and mighty, so he spoke with a condescending tone. Ning Xuema's body stiffened slightly, and she turned to look at him. She pursed her lips, but didn't say anything. Shinjuli probably also realized that his tone was stiff, so he coughed lightly. "This hot spring is actually a bit dangerous. If you are not careful, you may be scalded. You have also been drowned before. Don't worry, I won't touch you. I will only help you heal." His gaze fell on Xuema's leg under the water. There was still a faint scar there. Although it had already healed, it was still a serious injury, so the new flesh and skin inside was still different from the normal skin around it. During the fight, Ning Xuema's mind was extremely tense and momentarily forgot about the injuries on her body. Now that her mind had completely relaxed, she felt that her muscles were tired and aching. It was as if all the bones in her body had been disassembled. It was rare for him to explain so much, and Ning Xuema's heart moved. She was indeed afraid of being drowned, so after hearing him say so, she didn't say anything else. She used to be a person who was used to bossing others around, but after coming to this world, she frequently tasted the malice of the world, which changed her temperament a little. For example, right now, she didn't want to fight for something that didn't exist. She closed her eyes, gathered her thoughts, and began to circulate her energy according to the methods he said. After channeling her energy, she finally realized the benefits of having the Almighty behind her. The psyche power that he transferred to her was controlled very well. It was neither too big nor too small, and it was just right to follow her own neishi and wander in her body. Wherever it passed, it was like dry land being watered by sweet dew. Her tight muscles finally relaxed and felt very comfortable. After 3 circulations, Ning Xuema's fatigue had mostly disappeared, and the soreness in her injured muscles had also eased a lot. After all, she had been risking her life for too long. After soaking in a hot spring for a while, she was so sleepy that she couldn't open her eyes. Her head was nodding, and she looked like she was about to fall asleep at any moment. Tired and sleepy? Sleep if you're sleepy. Shinjuli gently stroked her hair with his other hand. I'll sleep when I get back," Ning Xuema mumbled. She didn't dare to sleep. It was very dangerous to sleep in the water. "You might drown again, I'm here." I won't let you drown. Air. I'm afraid. Ning Xiuma was actually very sleepy, but she still forced herself to talk. It was as if she had one eye open even in her sleep. What are you afraid of? Why are you still afraid when I'm here? Shen Julie's voice was a little deep. Yes, I shouldn't be afraid when you're here. Her voice gradually became softer. It was obvious that she was so sleepy that she couldn't find her bearings. But what? But you'll leave me behind. I don't want to be left behind again. I said before, I have to rely on myself for everything. Chapter 885. Shen Julie's fingers trembled slightly. He naturally knew what Ning Xiuma meant. That time when Yi Qingwan captured her, she waited bitterly for reinforcements. Although these memories had been forcibly removed by him, the shadow remained in her bones. It made her subconsciously not trust anyone. This was not something that could be removed in a short period of time. It could only be done slowly. Shen Julie secretly sighed and whispered, "Don't worry, it won't happen. I don't like to be forced. You have to respect my opinion." Ning Xiuma muttered again. Shen Julie's eyes moved slightly. He paused for a moment and said, "Okay." He knew that Xiuma had always been a very opinionated girl. She was also the only person on the continent who dared to raise conditions in front of him. He was the most powerful person on the continent. He didn't like to explain anything. He was used to using the fastest means to solve things. He rarely considered other people's feelings. And after treating her this way, it seemed to have caused a lot of unnecessary conflicts. While they were talking, Ning Xiuma took a nap in the water. Her body swayed. Fortunately, Shen Julie was behind her and supported her in time. She didn't plunge into the water. Shen Julie couldn't help but want to laugh. He also felt a little distressed. He was stunned. I actually have this kind of distressed feeling. This made him feel very strange. It was also the first time that he saw Xiuma so sleepy. It was obvious that she had been working very hard these 2 days. Ning Xiuma also came back to her senses. She suddenly pinched herself to make herself more energetic. She forced her eyelids open. I'd better go back to sleep, since she insisted. Shen Julie didn't force her. Okay. He took her hand and walked to the shore. You go. Ning Xiuma hugged her chest and squatted on the ground. She came back to her senses. Your clothes are here. Dizun pointed to a big rock next to him. Sure enough, there was a brand new set of clothes on it. Ning Xiuma quickly and efficiently put on the clothes. Finally, she had some confidence. She looked all around her, but all she could see were bright red trees. She couldn't see the end of the trees. She didn't know where to go. Shinjili held her hand and said, "Close your eyes." Ning Xiuma felt relieved after leaving the water. As expected, he closed his eyes. Shinjili pulled her into his arms. As the wind blew past her ears, she felt as if her body was floating in the clouds. A moment later, Shinjili appeared in the bedroom with Xiuma in his arms. "All right, open your eyes." For a long time, there was still no movement. Shinjili lowered his head to look at her in his arms. He saw that her eyelashes were slightly closed and her breathing was shallow. She had actually fallen asleep. He couldn't help but smile. His palm gently rubbed her hair. Her hair was still wet, but after being rubbed by him, it was dry. He was about to put her on his bed when he suddenly seemed to realize something. He turned around and appeared in the side hall where she used to live. He put her on the bed and covered her with a quilt. He stood there and looked at her for a moment before turning around and leaving. Inside a room that seemed to be made of ice, a man in white was sitting on a futon. He seemed to be meditating with his eyes closed. Suddenly, he seemed to notice something. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the man in white who flashed in the door. He slowly stood up and bowed. The man in white was Shun Juli. He looked down at the man in white. His eyes were like snow. "Do you know your crime?" The man in white had the same figure as Shun Juli. When they both wore masks, they looked like the same person. Chapter 886. The man in white was Di Zun's substitute. Even in his own room, he wore a mask. When he heard Shun Juli's question, he raised his head slightly and said, "Supreme Divinity, if you don't accept her as your disciple, I have a feeling that she might be your origin tribulation. Do I need you to tell me who I want to accept as my disciple? Shinjuli's voice turned cold. Supreme divinity. She is not worth it. The man in white was unwilling to give up and wanted to persuade him again. Boom! Shinjuli suddenly raised his sleeve, and a light red wave flashed and shrouded the man in white. The man in white seemed to be tortured, and his whole body trembled slightly. Shinjuli's voice was as cold as snow. Wu Mo, you have crossed the line. The man in white finally bowed down and said, You have been following me for more than 2,000 years, and you have always been very reliable. Therefore, I trust you and use you. What did I tell you before I went into seclusion? Say it again. Shinjuli's eyes were shining. The man in white paused and finally said slowly, Supreme Divinity told me to take good care of Miss Ning and prepare the food that Supreme Divinity has already planned for her. I will take her out of the dark forest and let her become your disciple openly. If I disobey, I will be punished by being imprisoned in the soul-grinding valley for a year, Shinjuli said lightly. In that case, you can go and accept your punishment. He turned around and was about to leave. Supreme Divinity, I don't mind the punishment, but I want to say that this woman is most likely the origin tribulation of Supreme Divinity. You must be careful of her. Shinjuli turned around slowly. He looked at Shinjuli's face coldly and said, My fate is not determined by the heavens. You talk too much. He waved his sleeve again, and the light red light around Wu Mo suddenly tightened. Wu Mo's throat hurt, and his voice was broken. Go and accept your punishment, Shinjuli said and turned around to leave. Wu Mo slowly sat down on the cattail hassock and closed his eyes slightly. This was the first time he had received such a big punishment since he started following the ancestor. However, this was an oath he had made to the ancestor long ago. Now that he had violated the oath, it was only natural for him to be punished. He had already expected this outcome, so he wasn't surprised. However, he did not regret it. If he could do it all over again, he would do it again. After he sat down, he formed a seal with his fingertips. A moment later, a whirlpool that seemed to contain countless weapons appeared in the void. The whirlpool slowly pressed down on him and gradually swallowed his entire body. He was nowhere to be seen in the ice room. The black gas in the soul-grinding valley surged violently. Every wisp of black gas was a rope that would tightly bind him inside. Every night, he would suffer the pain of the black gas pouring into his head. That feeling was like being skinned alive. It was abnormally painful. He would not be free unless he left the valley. After Wu Mo disappeared, Shinjuli reappeared in the ice room. He stood there and looked at the place where Wu Mo had disappeared. His eyes were faintly complicated. A moment later, he turned around and left. Ning Xiaomo had a good sleep. She slept from early in the morning until the sun set. When she woke up, the sky was already filled with stars. She opened her eyes and saw the bed curtain in front of her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked around again. The room was decorated in a very familiar way. This was the side hall where she used to live, and not the ancestor's bedroom. Ning Xiaoma's memory was still stuck at the moment when the ancestor carried her back to the room after soaking in the hot spring. Chapter 887. Ning Xiaoma thought that Dizun would directly carry her back to his palace, but it turned out that he sent her to his own side chamber. This was a bit out of her expectations, but it also made her feel relieved. Her current identity was special, and if she really slept on the same bed with him, she would feel very uncomfortable. She first sensed her body. After all, she was too tired, and her body was still sore. Fortunately, she didn't feel that kind of soreness after resting. It seemed that soaking in the hot spring was still very beneficial. Then, she sensed the psychokinesis in her body. She was pleasantly surprised to find that the fire spiritual root was much thicker than before. It was originally only the size of a little finger, but now it was as thick and long as a middle finger. She estimated that if she cultivated for a few more days, it would level up, and the wood spiritual root was even more luxuriant, green like jade. Looking internally, it was more than 2 feet long, and it looked very pleasing to the eye. According to this momentum, if she cultivated for another 8 to 10 days, she estimated that she would be able to level up to Earth rank level 3. She finally got rid of her identity as a good-for-nothing. She finally got rid of her identity as a concubine. Haha, from now on, she would create her own world. Ning Shuima's heart was filled with joy. She couldn't help but dance a few steps on the bed. Then with a spin, she landed on the ground. She looked at the clothes on her body. She was too tired this morning, so she almost closed her eyes and put on the clothes without looking at the style. Now she could see that the style of the clothes was very simple, but it was very fitting. It was soft and comfortable to wear. It was very obvious that this was an ancient version of pajamas. She washed up and opened a closet in the room. She found that there was actually a neat stack of new clothes inside. There were all kinds of colors: fiery red, light blue, light pink. It was too much for Ning Shuima's eyes to take in. Did the great god prepare this for her? Shuima's heart was filled with a warm feeling. She picked a set, put it on neatly, and ran out of the side chamber. She was hungry, so she wanted to find something to eat. While she was at it, she also wanted to greet the great god. After all, he was now her master, so she should still have the proper etiquette. Just as she stepped out of the door, her feet paused. In the twilight, Shun Julie was sitting at a small table under a grape trellis in her courtyard. There was tea and pastries on the table. He was sitting there drinking tea. He was not wearing a mask. The wind lifted his long hair and the corners of his robe, making them flutter. When he saw Ning Shuima come out, he looked her up and down. "You look good." He then gestured to the seat opposite him with his chin. "Sit." Ning Shuima sat down across from him. She thought of his injuries and looked at his complexion. He didn't look too bad. His lips were red and his teeth were white. It seemed that he had fully recovered after a few days of seclusion. Ning Shuima was finally relieved. She looked at the pastries on the table. They were sparkling and fragrant. It was even steaming. She didn't need to taste it. Just by smelling it, she knew that these pastries were her dishes and that they suited her taste. She looked at Shin Julie, who was sitting opposite her. He was drinking tea and had no intention of eating the pastries. Obviously, he had prepared them for her. Her heart warmed again. These pastries are not bad. As she spoke, she felt even hungrier. She raised her hand to take a piece, but Shin Julie took out a white jade flute from nowhere and held it against her wrist. Her hand could no longer move. Ning Shuima looked at him in confusion. "You didn't want her to eat?" Shin Julie said lightly, "This is a prize. You can't eat it now." "What prize?" Ning Shuima was surprised. Chapter 888. Shin Julie raised his sleeves, and a chessboard appeared on the table. "If you win, you can eat a piece of cake." Ning Shuima raised her eyebrows. "What if I lose?" She didn't have much chance of winning against him, so she had to ask first. "You haven't even played yet, and you're already asking if you lose. Is that all you have?" Ning Shuima didn't fall for his provocation. She raised her eyebrows and smiled. "It's better to be straightforward. It's very simple. If you win, you can eat a piece of cake. If I win, you have to answer one of my questions truthfully. It seems that I'm at a disadvantage. If I win, I'll get a piece of cake. If I win, I want a plate of cakes." Ning Shuima's gaze fell on the cakes. Each of them was small, like dice, and not enough to fill the gaps between her teeth. A plate was more like it. "Are you bargaining with me?" The ancestor smiled. "If you win, you can eat 3 cakes. However, if you lose, not only do you have to answer one of my questions, but you also have to give me a small reward." The ancestor also wants a reward? She had nothing on her, and even the clothes she was wearing were prepared for her by him. The ancestor had already arranged the chessboard and handed the black agate pieces to her. "Don't worry, the reward is something you can give at any time. It's very easy. Then it's still not worth it. If I win, you have to allow me to ask a question." This little girl really didn't want to lose out at all. The ancestor chuckled and tapped the chessboard with his finger. "All right, it's up to you." After discussing the conditions, the two sat opposite each other and played chess. Once they entered the game, Ning Shuima was fully focused. She didn't dare to be distracted. In the game, the Almighty didn't give in to her at all. If she didn't pay attention, she would fall into his trap. The great god treated her as a real opponent to kill, and Ning Shuima was not someone who would give way to others. This game of chess lasted for more than 2 hours before the dust settled. Ning Xuema lost by a difference of 2 suns. Ning Xuema was also someone who was willing to admit defeat. What do you want to ask? Why didn't you use the sound-transmitting talisman I gave you when you were in danger? The ancestor's question was super simple. You must have been seriously injured when you suddenly disappeared. You needed to go into seclusion to heal your wounds. It's taboo to be disturbed while you're in seclusion. Besides, I also want to win this battle with my own abilities, Ning Xuema answered straightforwardly. Shun Jiulu's eyes flickered slightly. So you were mainly afraid of disturbing me. There seemed to be a smile on his lips as he beckoned to her. Come here. Ning Xuema looked at him warily. What are you doing? Shun Jiuli's gaze fell on the space between her eyebrows, as if he was thinking, that space between your eyebrows, there seems to be something wrong. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Between her eyebrows, there was a cinnabar mole that represented a heavenly marriage. Now, something was wrong. Could it be that after she became his disciple, she was no longer his concubine, so that cinnabar mole disappeared? She couldn't help but raise her hand to touch it, but she didn't feel anything unusual. The cinnabar mole was still there. Great God, wasn't our engagement canceled? Why is it still there? Shinjili tapped on the chessboard lightly. Good question. When you win, I can answer you this as a reward. He simply stood up, walked in front of her, and pulled her up. His eyes stared at her forehead. Ning Xuema was scared by his stare. What's going on? Before she could finish her words, Shun Jili pulled her into his arms and pressed his warm lips on her forehead. Ning Xuema only felt a heat on her forehead, as if a wisp of electric current had entered, which made her heart jump. She subconsciously pushed him. You. Chapter 889. Unexpectedly, Di Zun let go of her easily this time. He turned around and sat back in front of his seat. Just a small reward. So this was the reward he wanted. Ning Xuema touched her forehead. The cinnabar mole didn't hurt or itch, so she didn't feel anything unusual. She looked at him suspiciously. Guru, you didn't do anything wrong, right? Shinjuli looked at her lazily. What do you want me to do when I kiss your forehead? He muttered. Or, you actually want me to do something wrong? Ning Xuema was speechless. Guru, you've lost your integrity. Forget it, it's just a kiss on the forehead. This reward isn't too much. However, she seemed to be even hungrier. She even made a grumbling sound. The sound was loud enough that Ning Xuema felt a little uncomfortable. She wanted him to hear it, but at the same time, she didn't want him to hear it. She was really hungry. Shinjili didn't seem to hear it. Instead, he slowly ate 3 pieces of pastries. Then he knocked on the chessboard with his hand. Second game, he really didn't want to be flexible. Ning Xuema's stubborn temper also rose. She took a deep breath. Her nose pointed to her mouth, and her mouth pointed to her heart, suppressing her hunger. The two of them started the second game. This time, Ning Xuema played very carefully. In order to fill her stomach, she went all out. She used all her skills. After all, she was hungry, and there were pastries beside her constantly, attracting her attention. After half an hour, she lost again by a single piece. As a result, Ning Xuema looked on helplessly as he ate another 3 pieces of pastries. While he was at it, he leisurely kissed the tip of her nose and answered his rather perverted question. Have you missed me these days? Although she was willing to accept her loss, Ning Xuema's heart was still a bit angry. Therefore, she smiled and replied with a satisfied tone, Yes, I do. I really do. Although Shun Juli was used to being expressionless, at this moment, his pair of blue eyes flashed with a faint smile. Obviously, he was very satisfied with her answer. Ning Xuema added, I want to know how you developed such a perverted personality. Shun Juli was speechless. The smile in his eyes disappeared. He knocked on the chessboard with his finger. Continue. In the third game, Shun Jili suddenly changed his usual style of chess. His attacks were fierce and merciless. Especially his momentum in the game. It was extremely oppressive. Ning Xuema was startled by his sudden change in chess style. Furthermore, the invisible aura emitted from his body made her unable to breathe. Her heartbeat inexplicably thundered. Thus, she lost again. She lost by 4 or 5 stones. After this game of chess, Ning Xuema felt as if she had fought a tough battle. Coupled with her hunger, beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. Thus, she watched as the 3 pieces of pastries entered his mouth, and the fire in her heart started to burn. She was going to starve to death. Could it be that the Almighty would not go easy on her at all? Even a piece of cake to fill her stomach would be good. This time, Shun Jili kissed her on the cheek. Ning Xuema's face was expressionless as she allowed him to kiss her. The first 2 times he kissed her, she was a little nervous. This time, it was different. Shun Jili looked at her expression. "Are you angry?" "I didn't." Ning Xuema replied stiffly. "It's good that you're not angry. Then, answer me a question." "You." He was about to ask the 3rd question. Ning Xuema interrupted him. "You've already asked. You can't ask any more." Shun Jili paused for a moment and smiled. He did not smile easily, but this smile was like a flower blooming. "Okay, I'll take it that I asked." Chapter 890. Ning Xuema was dazzled by his smile. Then, she looked away and fell on the remaining 3 pieces of pastries on the table. She calmed herself down and said, again, she didn't believe that she would keep losing. She didn't believe that she couldn't eat a piece of pastry. Playing chess is like practicing martial arts. The most important thing to avoid is being impatient. No matter what situation you encounter, you must remember not to mess up your position, Shun Jili suddenly said. Ning Xuema pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Her fingers squeezed the agate chess piece tightly as she thought about her next move. She was particularly cautious in this game. She advanced step by step and didn't give in at all. This game of chess took a long time to play. Ning Xuema hadn't eaten for a day. She played chess until midnight. Although she had been holding it in, her stomach didn't live up to her expectations. From time to time, it would growl to remind her of its existence in the quiet night. The sound was very clear. Ning Xuema was embarrassed and angry. She inhaled and exhaled to suppress the hunger that was getting more and more serious. After her stomach growled again, Shun Jili finally looked at her and said with a faint smile, "Do you want me to give you a handicap?" Ning Xuema was also stubborn. "No need. You're ambitious." Shun Jili nodded his head and praised her. It was a compliment. He didn't show any mercy this time. He also gave his all. If he was serious about playing chess, no one would be his opponent. Rong Yuishinlin couldn't either. The reason why he occasionally lost to Rong Yuishinlin once or twice was because he was afraid that Rong Yuishinlin would lose too badly and never play with him again. Therefore, the old Dizun played chess casually. Once he got serious, his opponent would only be defeated by him. Most of the time, he played chess for fun. Because his chess skills were too good, it wasn't easy for him to cultivate Rong Yuishinlin, an opponent who could play chess with him. Therefore, he valued this friend very much. Shun Jili thought that he wouldn't meet a second opponent who could make him serious, but he didn't expect to meet such a freak like Ning Xuema. Her chess skills were so high at such a young age. As long as he was distracted for a moment, she would have the opportunity to take a few bites from him. Thus, after he witnessed Ning Xuema's chess skills at Rongyue Tianlan's Carefree Island, he had the idea of training her as a chess opponent. This way, once his chess addiction kicked in, he wouldn't have to travel thousands of miles to find Rongyue Tianlan to PK. When the game was about to end, Shun Jili raised his eyes to look at her tense little face. His fingers paused slightly, and for the first time he began to consider whether he should give her a handicap. Firstly, he didn't like to eat this kind of pastry, and he was a little sick of it after eating a few pieces. Secondly, if this little girl didn't eat a single piece, she might really get angry, but there is no father and son on the chessboard. Naturally, there was no lover on the chessboard. She had just said that giving in on the chessboard was a sign of disrespect to the opponent. Forget it, I won't allow it. It was rare to meet someone who could make him use all his energy to play chess. How could he not play to his heart's content? And so, in the end, Ning Xuema lost by a single piece. You lost. The Dizun raised his head. Ning Xuema took a deep breath and stood up. Yes, I lost. Congratulations. She looked up at the sky. It was already 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. She had played chess with the great god for nearly an entire night for the sake of pastries, but in the end, she had completely lost. She didn't even get a single piece of pastry in her mouth. She had smelled the flavor of pastries all night for nothing. Yes, one must be willing to accept defeat. There was no such thing as father and son on the chessboard. Chapter 891. She knew that there was no such thing as father and son in a game of chess. However, there was still a fire burning in her heart. She felt wronged. She took another deep breath and turned to leave. She wanted to go down Tianyin Peak to look for food. She was starving. Wait. Shinjili stopped her from behind. Is there anything else? Ning Xiuma didn't even want to turn her head. You haven't fulfilled your bet. Shinjili did things by the book. Ning Xiuma was speechless. The fire in her heart burned even brighter. She turned around and said, "Okay, I'll fulfill my bet." She deliberately didn't look at the remaining 3 pieces of pastries, lest she couldn't help but pick them up and slap them on his face. Shinjili looked at her angry face. It seemed that she was really angry. He raised his hand and picked up a piece of pastry. "I can give you a piece of pastry, but you have to take the initiative to kiss me." Ning Xiuma paused and pursed her lips. "In your dreams. You really don't want it? Humph. Don't regret it." Shinjili spoke slowly. "Don't." This time, Ning Xiuma's tone became heavier. "Then forget it." Shinjili didn't force her and slowly ate the remaining 3 pieces. Ning Xiuma saw that he really ate it, and the fire in her heart was about to burn into magma. The grievance in her heart surged, and she tightly closed her mouth. She didn't know why, but she had a faint sense of familiarity with this scene. Dizun didn't want to let her go. This pastry is made of 1,000-year-old Solomon seal. Eating 1 piece can increase your psychokinesis by at least 10 years. He didn't start to explain the effect of the pastry until now. Ning Xiuma was speechless. She clenched her fingers in her sleeves. "However, to be able to get a piece of this pastry by kissing me once, this transaction couldn't be more profitable, but you gave up this opportunity in a fit of pique. Xiuma, this isn't like you." The ancestor's eyes rested on her. Ning Xiuma's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't a person who got angry easily. No matter what she encountered, she could calmly analyze the situation and then choose the most beneficial to herself. She had never been angry with anyone before because she felt that this kind of behavior was somewhat childish. She also didn't think that there would be a day when she would be so childish. It was reasonable to say that Dizun hadn't gone overboard in his actions. If she had encountered this kind of situation in the past, Ning Xiuma would never have chosen to act rashly. She could either give him a kiss or laugh it off. But now, she was angry, and she didn't regret it at all. What did this mean? She couldn't figure it out for a moment. She focused all her attention on suppressing her boiling anger. That was why she kept a straight face and didn't say anything. Shinjili clapped his hands and brushed off the pastry crumbs. He walked her step by step. He was tall, and when they stood facing each other, Xiuma's figure seemed particularly petite. "Then I'll ask you a question. Do you like me?" He finally asked the question he cared about the most. He knew that Ning Xiuma didn't hate him, but he really didn't know whether she liked him or not, or whether she loved him or not. He really couldn't feel it. Ning Xiuma froze, but then she smiled and glanced at him. "Dizun, you already asked me a question, so I won't answer this question." Shinjili was stunned. What did he ask? Ning Xiuma reminded him. "You just asked me if I really didn't want it. My answer was no. That counted?" Shinjili was stunned. Chapter 892. It was a rare sight to see him suffer a setback. Ning Xiuma's indescribable anger seemed to dissipate a little bit. Shinjili suddenly took a step forward. Ning Xiuma couldn't help but take a step back. However, she looked up at him, unwilling to admit defeat. She didn't break the rules. He had already asked, so she didn't have to answer him. Stubborn little girl. Shinjili pulled her into his arms. Ning Xiuma felt uncomfortable and couldn't help but struggle. "Don't move. I'm just taking back my own little benefit." Shinjili looked at her. Their faces were very close. His breath lingered on her face. Ning Xiuma closed her eyes. Take it. Wasn't it just another peck on her forehead and cheeks like a dragonfly skimming the water? She didn't care. Suddenly, something soft touched her tightly pursed lips. He said in a low voice, "Be good, open your mouth." Her nose was filled with the fragrance of pastries. She didn't open her mouth. Instead, she opened her eyes and saw that he was sending a piece of sparkling pastry to her lips. Ning Xiuma suddenly felt wronged. She turned her face away. "I don't want it." She lost. She didn't want this handout food. However, as soon as she opened her mouth, Shun Juli stuffed the pastry in his hand into her mouth. She subconsciously wanted to spit it out, but his lips suddenly pressed down. His kiss was so strong that Xiuma couldn't push him away, even if she wanted to. Because she struggled, he held her even tighter. After he sent the pastry into her mouth, the tip of his tongue forced hers to dance together. The pastry melted in her mouth. The fresh and sweet fragrance was dense in their mouths. After a while, Shun Jili finally let go of her. Ning Xiuma suddenly took a step back. The pastry had already slipped into her stomach. It was strange that such a small piece of pastry made her poor stomach feel full. She glared at him, her heart thumping nonstop. She didn't know what to feel. She paused for a moment before saying, "All right, I've already exchanged all my bets for you." She turned around and left. "Where are you going?" "Look for food," Ning Xiuma replied stiffly. Her figure flashed out of the courtyard. She probably went down the peak. It seemed that she had really pissed her off. However, with her current physique, she could only eat one piece of this kind of pastry a day at most. Otherwise, not only would she waste the 1,000-year-old seal wort, but she would also have problems. This was also the reason why he had said that he would bet a piece of cake at the beginning. He had originally wanted Xiuma to win a small round, but she had changed the bet. So for the sake of her life, he couldn't let her win no matter what. Of course, he could also explain all these reasons to Xiuma. Firstly, he was too lazy to explain. Secondly, this kind of pastry had to be nourished in his storage space with telekinesis. He couldn't let her keep it by herself. So, Shun Jili sat in the same place for a moment. He took out a sound-transmitting spell and connected. "Rongyue Tianlan." After a while, Rongyue Tianlan's dying voice came from the sound-transmitting spell. "Dizun, it's the middle of the night. Do you have any urgent instructions?" I used the sealwork cake as an excuse to play chess with Xiuma in the middle of the night. As expected, I managed to get some of her inner thoughts. However, she was a little angry. Of course, there were some things that couldn't be said to Rongyue. Shinjili not only asked some of Xiuma's inner thoughts, but also took advantage of her. Chapter 893. Ronyu suddenly thought of something and asked, "Dizwa, how many rounds did you win?" "How many rounds did she win?" Shun Jili paused and said, "I didn't let her win, so she didn't win a single round." Ronyu Tianlan was speechless. No wonder the girl was angry. Anyone would be angry. He couldn't help but rub his eyebrows. "Dizwa, you should at least let her win a round. If you really treat her as a disciple, it's fine even if you torture her 1,000 times. But if you want the girl to fall in love with you, this won't do." However, being angry because of this proves that she unknowingly cares about you. Ronyu Tianlan chattered on and on with the sound transmission talisman for a long time, but there was no response from the other side. He was a little surprised and looked down. His head was full of black lines. He didn't know when the ancestor had cut off the sound transmission talisman. He had wasted so many sutras to pick up girls. Ning Xiumo ran down the heavenly sound peak and went straight to the kitchen. Although she didn't feel hungry anymore after eating the pastry, she still felt that it wasn't enough to fill her up. Sometimes, people mainly ate to satisfy their mouths. Xiumo felt that her mouth was still hungry, and there was some good food in the kitchen. She could get some to eat. If she had known that she couldn't win a single round, she wouldn't have wasted so much effort on him. However, Xiumo forgot that it was the middle of the night. The disciples in the kitchen were still resting and didn't open the door. She pounced on empty air. Looking at the closed door, she had no choice but to leave. She didn't want to go back to the heavenly sound peak at the moment. She wanted to walk around nearby. There was a lot of bamboo on Buddha Lotus Mountain. Bamboo forests could be seen everywhere. She wandered around casually and occasionally met the patrolling disciples of the Sun Moon sect. She was now very famous in the Sun Moon sect. During the last few rounds of the competition, many disciples of the Sun Moon sect were present and saw her skills. Therefore, almost all the disciples here knew her. When they met on the road, they immediately greeted her respectfully and called her Grand Martial Aunt. She was speechless. It couldn't be helped. The disciples patrolling the mountain were basically the grand disciples of the ancestors' grand disciples, and Ning Xuema was now the ancestors' direct disciple, so it wasn't wrong to call her Martial Granduncle. Ning Xuema had always liked to pretend to be young. Now that she was suddenly promoted to an ancestor, she felt like she was suddenly called Grandmom on the street. She suddenly felt a sense of vicissitudes. She couldn't help but touch her own face, afraid that she would touch a bunch of wrinkles. Fortunately, her cheeks were still tender when she touched them, which made her feel a little relieved. In order to prevent others from calling her Martial Granduncle a few times, she turned around and found a secluded place to wander around. In any case, they were in the Sun Moon sect's territory. No matter how secluded the place was, there wouldn't be any bandits or monsters appearing. It was very safe. After a few twists and turns, she arrived at a hillside. There was a large patch of xiangfei bamboo here, which rustled in the night. Ning Xuema liked the fragrance of the bamboo, so she walked over. Her nose was filled with the refreshing fragrance of the bamboo. Ning Xuema took a deep breath and felt that the inexplicable anger in her heart suddenly dissipated by quite a bit. When she thought about it carefully, her anger seemed to have arisen for no reason. There was no such thing as father and son on the chessboard. There was no room for compromise. This was what they had agreed on earlier. It seemed a little strange for her to be angry at him just because she lost a few rounds. Why was she becoming more and more petty? It really wasn't like her. Chapter 894. Ning Xuema raised her hand to rub her forehead and yawned. After staying up for half the night, she was also tired. She was going to go back to sleep. Just as she was about to turn around, she suddenly sensed something and looked towards a small lake outside the bamboo forest. The small lake was not big and was surrounded by a bamboo forest. There were a few large rocks scattered on the shore, adding a bit of rustic charm to the small lake. On the large rock beside the lake sat a young girl in a lake blue dress. That young girl hugged her knees with her head resting on them. Her long hair draped over her shoulders and fluttered slightly in the wind. Ning Xuema only saw her side profile, but from this side profile, Ning Xuema could tell her identity, Tian Xueching, Ji Yinhuang's future crown prince consort. Ning Xuema raised her head to look at the sky. Dawn came late in the winter, and there was still some time before daybreak. Why did this crown prince consort not sleep in the middle of the night and come here alone? Ning Xuema noticed that Ji Yinhuang treated this future crown prince consort coldly, but this kind of matter was not something that an outsider could interfere with. Therefore, she did not ask. Now that she saw Tian Xueching sitting there alone, her back gave people a kind of miserable feeling. It was as if there was a faint sadness and loneliness spreading from her back. She couldn't have jumped into the lake, right? Ning Xuema looked at the lake again. She had been to this lake before, and it was not deep. It would not drown anyone. Perhaps she was unhappy, so she came here alone to relieve her boredom? Ning Xuema was not a person who liked to meddle in other people's business. Moreover, she was not familiar with this Miss Tian Xueching. Therefore, she stood there for a moment before turning around to leave. Who is it? Tian Xueching was also a sharp person. She turned around to look in Ning Xuema's direction. Ning Xuema naturally could not leave at this time. She walked out from the shadow of the bamboo forest and smiled. It's me. Her heart skipped a beat. In her previous life, she was extremely proficient in the art of tracking. If she were to follow someone, almost no one would be able to detect her. In this life, her martial arts had improved a lot compared to her previous life. Naturally, her tracking skills had also improved a lot. Even Ji Yinhuang might not be able to detect her presence, but she did not expect that Tian Xueching, who looked so gentle and weak, would be able to detect her so easily. Looks like this Miss Tian Xueching isn't simple either. So it's martial Uncle Ning. Tian Xueching also stood up and bowed. Her voice was cold and indifferent. It was as cold as her personality. Ning Xiuma knew that she was addressing her according to Ji Yunwang's seniority, so she nodded. I accidentally wandered here and didn't expect to disturb the crown prince consort. My apologies. Tian Xueqing lowered her eyes slightly and said indifferently, Martial Uncle Ning is too polite. Martial Uncle Ning, if you don't regard me as an outsider, please call me Xueqing by her name. I don't deserve to be called crown prince consort. The two exchanged some pleasantries before Ning Xiuma took her leave. Her senses were sharp, so she could tell that this Tian Xueqing did not like her. Her attitude towards her was respectful and cold. Although it was strange for Tian Xueqing to sit here alone in the middle of the night, Ning Xiuma did not ask too much. As long as the other party did not seek death here, she was too lazy to intervene. She walked out of the bamboo forest and turned a corner. Suddenly, she heard voices in front of her. She paused and raised her head to look. From afar, she saw 4 to 5 people walking over. These people were wearing the clothes of the Sun Moon sect's 3rd-generation disciples. There were both men and women, so they were somewhat conspicuous in the night. Chapter 895. Ning Xiuma recognized one of them. It was the crown prince, Ji Yunwang. He seemed to have drunk a little too much as he staggered slightly. A young girl followed closely behind him. 3rd senior martial brother, walk slower. It's fine. Ji Yunwang pushed away the girl's hand. A faint trace of resentment flashed through the girl's eyes, but she smiled slightly. 3rd senior martial brother, why are you in such a hurry? Are you in a hurry to go back and see the crown princess? 3rd senior martial brother, why didn't you bring the crown princess over when you were drinking? You should have let the other disciples get to know her. 5th junior martial sister, another youth called out to the girl, his tone faintly disapproving. 2nd senior martial brother, I'm serious. 3rd senior martial brother brought the crown princess here, but he didn't introduce her to everyone. Everyone wanted to get to know her. The girl retorted. Ji Yunwang pursed his lips into a line and suddenly looked at the girl. Little 5th, must you mention her? His voice was slightly cold. The other girl smiled and tried to smooth things over. All right, if 3rd senior martial brother doesn't want to mention her, then we don't need to. Hey, there's a rock over there. 3rd senior martial brother, be careful. Ji Yunwang was obviously drunk as he tripped over a rock and staggered. Fortunately, the young girl who had warned him was quick and supported him in a flash. 3rd senior brother, be careful. She frowned slightly. 3rd senior martial brother, you really drank too much. Why don't we go to the kitchen and ask for some hangover soup? 4th senior martial sister, did you forget? Right now, it's 2:45 in the morning. The kitchen hasn't opened yet. 5th junior martial sister reminded him. 4th senior martial sister patted her forehead and smiled. But I drank until I forgot the time. I actually forgot about this. 3rd senior martial brother, why don't you come to my place first? I can boil some hangover soup for you. If you go back like this, I'm afraid madam will be unhappy. Ning Xiuma didn't want to meet them at this time, so when she saw them clearly, she flew up the tree and wanted to wait for them to pass by before coming down. Once she hit her tracks, it wouldn't be easy for others to find her. Moreover, this group of people already had wine, so they didn't expect someone to be in the tree. They were very daring. They went under the tree, and sure enough, they didn't find Ning Xiuma hiding in the tree. That's right. 4th senior sister does have an excellent hangover soup. We all drink a lot of it tonight. Why don't we go there together? 5th junior sister immediately supported Ji Yunwang's arm from the other side and smiled as she continued. 3rd senior brother, it's better if you sober up before going back. Otherwise, that crown prince consort of yours will be unhappy and punish you outside the door. Speaking of which, that crown prince consort of yours has quite the character. That day, I spoke to her enthusiastically, but she only replied me with, Ah, crown prince consort. Ning Xiuma sensed something was wrong with her voice. Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked towards the source of the sound. She saw that Ji Yunwang's 5th junior sister had stopped, and not far in front of them, a young girl had appeared. It was Tian Xueqing, who Ning Xiuma had just met by the lake. She was wearing a lake blue dress, her black hair fluttering in the wind, and her beautiful face. The dreary moonlight shone on her body, giving her a sense of loneliness and frailty. Sister-in-law, Crown Prince Consort. Everyone was just talking about this Crown Prince Consort, so when the main character suddenly appeared, they were a little embarrassed. Tian Xueqing's attitude was indifferent as she nodded and greeted them. Hello, everyone. Ji Yinhuang steadied himself and swept a glance at her. His voice turned cold. You followed this prince? Ning Xiuma couldn't help but facepalm. Did Ji Yinhuang drink until he became stupid? Chapter 896. Ji Yinhuang drank until now and came back. Now that he met his own crown princess, he accused her of following him. She could testify that this crown princess did not follow Ji Yinhuang because she had met her at the lake just now. Ning Xiuma leaned against the tree trunk and crossed her arms to watch the show. Your Highness is overthinking. Tian Xueqing's voice was calm. Overthinking? Ji Yinhuang chuckled, and his gaze gradually sharpened. Aren't you the best at following me? Tian Xueqing's face turned slightly pale, but she pursed her lips and did not answer. No matter where I go, you will appear. Tian Xueqing. Must you be so persistent? Ji Yinhuang's eyes flashed with disgust. Tian Xueqing's face turned even paler, but she still did not speak. She paused and stepped forward to support his arm. You drank too much. Let me help you back. Scram. Ji Yinhuang, who had always been elegant, suddenly became furious. He fiercely swung his sleeve, and a faint light was emitted from his sleeve. Tian Xueqing staggered and retreated a few steps. Tian Xueqing's face turned pale as she looked at Ji Yinhuang. You. Everyone saw that the atmosphere was about to turn stiff and hurriedly tried to smooth things over. Third brother, you really drink too much. How can you treat the crown princess like this? Crown princess, please don't take offense. He drank 3 to 4 jugs of wine today, so he's a bit muddle-headed. That's right, Crown Princess, please don't take it to heart. Third senior brother hasn't reunited with his fellow disciples for a long time, so he was happy and drank a few more cups. I will apologize to you here. Please don't take it to heart. The fourth senior sister also spoke. Third senior brother, so you have a time when you were so rude to others. You scared me. The fifth junior sister seemed to be angry. She took the opportunity to support Ji Yinhuang's arm. Under the moonlight, Tian Xueqing's eyes were like a black pool, which made her face look even paler. These people seemed to be apologizing to her, but they were obviously excluding her. It was obvious that they were in the same circle, while she was outside of it. Tian Xueqing paused and stepped forward again. Her tone was calm and firm. Your Highness, you must return with me. Ji Yinhuang suddenly turned his head to look at the fourth junior sister on his left. Xiaoya, you said that you have hangover soup in your room? Fourth junior sister Xiaoya glanced at Tian Xueqing and said, This. Yes. Good. This prince will go with you. It's been a long time since I drank your hangover soup. I wonder if the taste is still as special as before? Ji Yinhuang didn't even look at Tian Xueqing and pretended to make his decision. All right. Xiaoya agreed readily and smiled apologetically at Tian Xueqing. Crown Prince Consort, third senior martial brother, is very picky when it comes to food. Originally, they all liked to drink the hangover soup made by their younger sister. This time, please let him go temporarily and let him come with me. When he sobers up, how about this little sister personally send him back to your room? Sure, I'll go too. I'll go too. Fifth junior sister immediately signed up. All right, let's go together. The other two youths looked at each other and said. One of the youths glanced at Tian Xueqing and felt a little apologetic. Crown Prince Consort, why don't you come with us? Tian Xueqing took a step back and lowered her eyes. No need. She turned around and walked away alone. Under the moonlight, her back was straight, which made her figure seem even more desolate. She walked very quickly and disappeared at the end of the small path in just a moment. Third brother, your Crown Prince Consort seems to be quite skilled. One of the youths couldn't help but say when he saw Tian Xueqing's figure disappear. Chapter 897. Ji Yinhuang didn't say anything but his eyes flickered and his handsome face turned gloomy. It was obvious that he didn't want anyone to mention this crown princess. Yep, I was a considerate person and immediately said, all right, let's go to my place. Humph, with 4 drunken cats gone, I'm going to make a big pot of soup. The group of people chatted and laughed as they left. Ning Xiuma sat on the tree branch and lazily rested her chin on her hand as she pondered. The way Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueqing interacted with each other was very abnormal. What exactly happened between them? How did it end up like this? Furthermore, Ji Yunhuang's 2 junior sisters obviously harbored some special feelings for Ji Yunhuang. Moreover, both of them seemed to be quite scheming, especially that Immerse. Her words were like a needle hidden in cotton. If he were to bring her back to the palace, she would definitely be an expert in the palace's infighting. No wonder people said that Ji Yunhuang's admirers were all over the world. It seemed that it was true. Fortunately, he was going to ascend the throne in the future and could have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines. These women's wishes might not be disappointed, however. This Tian Xueqing's temperament was cold, and she looked a little naive. With her temperament, would she be able to keep her position as the empress in the harem? Furthermore, Ji Yunhuang hated her so much. This girl's fate was really worrying. Sigh. She sighed softly. Why are you sighing out of nowhere? A voice suddenly sounded from behind her. Ah! Ning Xiuma was startled. She was leaning on a small tree branch, and this shock caused her body to sway, and she almost fell down. An arm wrapped around her waist in time. Be careful. Ning Xiuma abruptly turned her head. Her nose almost bumped into the other party's nose. She hurriedly tilted her head back and looked at the ancestor who had appeared behind her at an unknown time. You, when did you arrive? Not long ago. The ancestor's reply was always concise. Ning Xiuma looked at the ancestor's arm that was wrapped around her waist and thought about the plate of pastries that had gone into his stomach. She felt that anger coming out again, and her charming face turned cold. She struggled in his arms. Let go of me. Shenjuli readily agreed. Okay. Sure enough, he immediately let go of his arm. Ning Xiuma was caught off guard. She struggled a little harder and fell down with a whoosh. Fortunately, her kung fu was quite good now. She somersaulted in the air and landed lightly on the ground. As soon as she landed, she immediately turned and left. She walked for a full 3 to 4 miles before she stopped and looked back. The road was vast and boundless, and no one was chasing after her. For some reason, a sense of disappointment rose in his heart. She pursed her lips and sat down on a stone bench by the roadside. A strange feeling of grievance rose in her heart. Strange, is it time for my period? Something's wrong with my mood. Why was he so easily angered? She rubbed the space between her eyebrows and hugged her knees as she stared at the stars. The sky was filled with stars. Looking at the stars in the sky in this world didn't seem to be any different from her original world. The Milky Way, the Big Dipper, hanging in the sky, she was reminded of her own world. Other people had transmigrated because of some accident, but she had transmigrated after a nap. It was really strange. She didn't know what had happened to her own body. Had she become a sleeping beauty or a vegetable? Or had she died and entered the crematorium? Chapter 898. Ning Xiuma's diehard friends and subordinates must be astonished and shocked when they saw her body, right? If she was in a vegetative state, maybe someone would tell her bedside stories to stimulate her brain and wait for her to wake up. She had transmigrated in her sleep. She didn't know if she would also transmigrate in her sleep one day. Maybe when she woke up in the other world, everything here would be a dream. But her dream was a bit too long. Since she couldn't remember her dreams, everything here would probably dissipate in her mind, and she wouldn't have any impression at all. What Dizun, what Sun Moon sect, what Crown Prince, they were all just fleeting clouds. She was still the boss of her own secret service, leading a group of subordinates to go through fire and water at this moment. Her thoughts drifted thousands of miles away. Are the stars beautiful? Dizun's cold voice sounded beside her again. Yes, they are beautiful, Ning Xiuma answered without thinking. She obviously hadn't pulled her thoughts back. She had always liked to look at the stars. Unfortunately, when she was in the modern world, the neon lights in the city blurred the stars, and the feeling of tranquility was missing. She would occasionally go to the mountains. At night, when there was no one in the mountains, looking at the vast sky filled with stars would calm her impetuous heart. Dizun looked at her and saw that her eyes were still staring at the stars, as if she was in a trance. Obviously, she didn't realize who was sitting next to her. It was the first time Shinjuli had been ignored so thoroughly. His eyes flashed slightly. "What are you thinking about?" His voice had a strange hypnotic taste, like a hypnotist, making people want to tell him the truth. Ning Xuema was still in a mental state, so naturally she wasn't on guard. She subconsciously opened her mouth. "I arrived here in a daze while I was sleeping. Perhaps everything that is happening right now is just a dream. When I wake up, I will return to my own world and forget everything that happened in this world." Dream? Forget? Shinjuli's eyes darkened. Forget about me too? The most regretful thing in my life is that I can't remember my dreams at all. I can't remember any of my dreams. No matter how colorful or bloody my dreams are, as long as I wake up, I can't remember anything. Ning Xuema pursed her lips in distress. She had the strongest brain, super memory, and super analytical ability, but she couldn't remember any dreams. Could it be that God realized she was too smart, so he gave her a small flaw? Didn't he want her to be so perfect? Just as she finished speaking, she felt a sudden pain in her palm, as if she had been pricked by a needle. She shuddered and suddenly came back to her senses. Only then did she realize that it was the ancestor who had been sitting beside her and chatting with her for a while. Her eyelashes trembled as if she had seen a ghost. "You're scaring me again. Why are you stabbing me?" "It was so painful." Shinjuli looked down at her and said seriously, "I didn't appear and disappear mysteriously. I appeared by your side, openly. You didn't realize it. As for stabbing you, well, did it hurt?" Ning Xuema glared at him fiercely. "Of course it hurt. If you don't believe me, let me stab you." Until now, her palm was still burning. Shinjuli's lips seemed to have a flash of a smile. He raised his hand and rubbed her head. "It's good that you know it hurts. It proves that this isn't a dream. It doesn't hurt to be pricked in a dream. I just want to prove to you that you're not dreaming." Chapter 899. Ning Xuema couldn't help but slap his hand away. She naturally knew that this wasn't a dream. She had transmigrated. Although the process of transmigrating was a bit thunderous, she looked at the ancestor's jade-like hand that was placed on her knee. Without thinking, she grabbed it and fiercely bit it. Shinjili was stunned by her childish behavior. His eyes flickered, but he did not say anything and allowed her to bite him. Her small teeth bit down on his hand, and the tip of her tongue touched his skin. In addition to the pain, there was also an indescribable itch that seemed to go straight to his heart. Ning Xuema loosened her bite and looked at the deep teeth marks on the back of his hand. Her bite was a bit heavy and almost made him bleed. "How is it? Does it hurt?" Ning Xuema finally got her revenge and looked at him with a proud expression. "It hurts a bit." Shinjuli looked at her bright eyes and honestly said, "It's good that you know it hurts. It proves that you aren't dreaming." Ning Xuema's eyes curved like crescent moons. She returned his words back to him. "I never thought that I was dreaming. Your proof doesn't make sense." Shinjuli looked at the teeth marks on his hand and then looked at her. Ning Xuema snorted. "Then I'll just treat it as me proving that I'm not dreaming. You also know that it hurts when I bite you. It proves that you're also real." Shinjuli. He looked at the 2 rows of teeth marks on his hand and then looked at her small mouth. "Your teeth are very beautiful." The 2 rows of teeth marks were very neat. Ning Xuema revealed her small white teeth and proudly said, "Of course, not only are my teeth beautiful, every part of my body is beautiful." She was very satisfied with her small body. Of course, this was with the exception of the fate of being a calamitous star. Shinjuli suddenly reached out and pulled her over. He let her sit on his knee and lowered his head to kiss her. "It really is beautiful. Let me take a closer look." It was a long and intimate kiss. Ning Xuema was gasping for breath. She wanted to push him away, but couldn't. Shuama discovered that his kissing technique was becoming more and more proficient. The first time he kissed her, he was as stiff as a young chick. When his lips collided with hers, her teeth hurt a little. But now he didn't have that awkward feeling anymore. Every kiss was deep. His body carried a kind of cool floral fragrance, which made her lose herself in an instant. His kiss this time was a bit special, as he used his tongue to brush her teeth. Then he let go of Ning Shuama's lips. It's really good. His forehead was still against Shuama's forehead. Their breaths intertwined, and warmth spread between the two peopleses. Ning Shuama's heart was beating like a drum. She looked at him who was so close to her. Great God, are you pursuing me? This kind of casual kissing was not how a master would treat his disciple. Shinjuli raised his eyebrows. You just realized it now. Ning Shuama pushed him slightly away. But I'm your disciple now, not your concubine. You can't just kiss me and go downstairs as you wish. Yes, is there a difference? Whether it's a concubine or a disciple, isn't it always you? Shinjuli's expression didn't change. Ning Shuama couldn't help but rub her eyebrows. But a master-disciple relationship is taboo. Since you want to pursue me, you shouldn't take me as your disciple. What was the Almighty thinking? Ning Shuama felt that she couldn't understand the Almighty's brain circuit. For me, any taboo is not taboo. Besides, isn't there a master-disciple relationship? Shinjuli replied disapprovingly. Chapter 900. Besides, you seem to be quite interested in the relationship between a master and his disciple. You made me up so well. Shinjuli rested his chin on her hair and answered lazily. Hey, when did I make you up? Ning Shuama was not convinced. She raised her head to look at him. But when she raised her head, her lips touched his beautifully curved chin, and he immediately lowered his head and kissed her lips. Then, he unceremoniously sold out Kirin. Little Apple said it. Ning Shuama was speechless. That big mouth. She had only said a few words. Kirin, who was recuperating in a large lake full of spiritual energy, suddenly sneezed and spurted out a column of water. It scratched its nose with its claws. What's going on? Who was speaking ill of it behind its back? Ning Shuama suddenly had an idea. Just because you heard Little Apple say that I made you up about the relationship between a master and his disciple, you just decided to make it true on me? You're very smart. Shinjuli praised her, implicitly admitting this point. Ning Shuama was speechless. This great god really took revenge for the smallest grievance. This revenge was unique. So, he was willing to accept her as his disciple for this, for the relationship between a master and his disciple. She couldn't help but push him and said with a straight face, Your interests are really special. You made an exception to accept me as your disciple this time, just to satisfy your interests? It's not entirely for fun. Your martial arts are too ordinary, so I want to train you personally. Who in this world can help you level up quickly than me, your master? Shinjili told her his plan. My martial arts aren't bad anymore. Ning Shuama raised her eyebrows. I'm already at Earth Stage Level 2. Who could level up as fast as her? If this level was placed outside, she could do whatever she wanted. That's right, Earth Stage Level 2. You're the lowest level among all my disciples. Shinjili attacked her self-esteem. Ning Shuama raised her chin. I'm a fast learner. I'll be able to level up very soon. Oh, I'll wait and see. Shinjili hugged her even tighter. He had never been so eager for someone to level up so quickly. Ning Shuama was about to say something when she suddenly sensed something. She looked towards the small path not far away and saw 6 patrolling Sun Moon sect disciples hurriedly walking over. Ning Shuama's heart sank. She couldn't help but look back at Shinjuli, who was hugging her. Your grand disciple is here. Do you want a flash? Shinjuli raised his eyebrows and seemed a little surprised. Why do I have to dodge when they come? You're not wearing a mask. Ning Shuama couldn't help but remind him. More importantly, he was hugging her. If anyone saw the master and disciple hugging and chatting here, it would probably be explosive news after dawn. I don't want to wear a mask in front of you, the ancestor replied casually. But Ning Xiuma started to push him away. She started to pull his hands that were wrapped around her slender waist. However, his hands were tightly clasped, and she couldn't pull them away. Grand Marshal Uncle? Greetings, Grand Marshal Uncle. The group of disciples moved very quickly. In the blink of an eye, they were in front of Ning Xiuma and Shun Juli. They all bowed to greet her. Ning Xiuma. She raised her head stiffly, expecting to see shock and other emotions on their faces. However, she didn't expect that they didn't have any shock. There was only a little surprise in their eyes. One of them couldn't help but ask, "Is Grand Marshal Uncle not feeling well?" He saw Ning Xiuma sitting there alone with her hands fidgeting around her waist. Chapter 901. Ning Xiuma stared blankly for a moment before she suddenly came to a realization. The ancestor must have used a special invisibility technique. Only she could see him, and no one else could see him. No wonder these disciples only saluted her and turned a blind eye to their most respected ancestor. So that's why. Ning Xiuma recalled her actions just now, twisting and turning as if catching lice. She felt a little embarrassed. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and coughed. "I'm cultivating here." It's a special technique." She rudely used her buttocks to grind the ancestor's leg and pinch his thigh. Unfortunately, the flesh on his thigh was very tight, and she couldn't pinch it. Everyone knew that she was the ancestor's new disciple, and the ancestor's style of teaching was unique. Of course, they didn't have the opportunity to see it, but they had heard about it. Now that they saw Ning Xiuma acting like this, they thought that she was really cultivating some kind of technique. Finally, they felt relieved and bowed to leave. The group of people quickly left. "You're doing it on purpose." Ning Xiuma fiercely sat on him again. "Don't move." The ancestor's voice was slightly hoarse. The light in his eyes gradually deepened. Ning Xiuma also finally felt the change in the body below her. Her face suddenly turned red. She obviously used a lot of strength. Even a stone would be crushed by her. But she didn't expect that the ancestor would act as if nothing had happened, and even have a reaction. Gulilu. A special sound broke the ambiguous atmosphere between the two people. The ancestor's eyes drooped and fell on her stomach. "Are you still hungry?" Of course. She had only eaten a small piece of pastry for a day and a night. Ning Xiuma remembered that unpleasant feeling again. She fiercely glared at him and said, "Let me go. I'm going to eat." She was about to stand up. Shun Jili directly wrapped his arms around her waist and said, "Let's go. I'll take you to eat." "Take me to eat?" "Eat what?" Ning Xiuma was about to ask, but the world in front of her was spinning, and the wind was whistling in her ears. She hurriedly opened her eyes and found that the two people were already in the clouds. The clouds on both sides were like a whirlwind, rapidly retreating several times faster than taking a plane. Ning Xiuma's waist was held by him as they traveled through the clouds. That kind of feeling was indescribably wonderful. Was this the so-called riding on the clouds? Ning Xiuma had seen this scene before. She also knew that the ancestor's psychokinesis, and that he should have become an immortal, and immortals could ride on the clouds. But after all, she had never seen it before. Now, she finally saw the real thing. He had even thoroughly experienced it. It's the ancestors was the ancestor, was the ancestor, was the ancestor, was the ancestor, was the ancestor. Great God, aren't you going to ride your sword? Ning Xiuma subconsciously grabbed his sleeve, afraid that he would play a prank on her and throw her down. Flying swords? When you reach the 8th level of the Earth realm, you will be able to ride a sword. Shun Jili replied. In other words, with his ability, he didn't need to rely on any tools to fly. The Almighty was indeed the Almighty, a true immortal. Ning Xiuma's eyes flashed with envy. She raised her chin and said, "I can do it too." "That's right. Even if you can't, I will train you until you can." Shun Jili stroked her hair. What was he saying? Why did it sound so cruel? Ning Xiuma changed the topic. "Where are you taking me?" "Good place." The Almighty's words were always so concise. Chapter 902. Ning Xiuma decided not to ask further. She would talk about it when they arrived at the destination. She realized that while Shun Jili was flying with her, every once in a while, Shun Jili would make a gesture with his fingers. Then, whirlpools of various sizes would appear in front of them, and he would bring her directly into the whirlpool. After a moment of dizziness, when she opened her eyes again, it would be a completely different world from what she had seen before. Ning Xiuma's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the celestial version of space jump? In those science fiction novels, when people wanted to drive spaceships to other planets, they didn't use conventional flight but space jump. It was said that there were countless points between heaven and earth that connected different space-time, which were the so-called space tunnels or teleportation points. Modern people hadn't found where these teleportation points were, nor did they know how to activate them. However, some extraterrestrial life forms were extremely advanced in science and technology. They had found these teleportation points, which was why they could freely travel to and from Earth. Ning Xiuma had always wondered how those celestial beings could ascend to the sky when they flew out of the atmosphere and into outer space. After all, the distance between this planet and that planet was tens of thousands of light years. Now, she suddenly understood that celestial beings didn't just rely on speed to ascend to the sky, but on discovering the space points and using them flexibly. Just like now, Dizun had brought her through 3 or 4 whirlpools and finally appeared in the sky above a city. Below them was a bustling crowd. After Ning Xiuma saw the faces of the people below, she couldn't help but sigh. Had she come to the Kingdom of Beauties? The people here were each more beautiful than the other. The men were handsome, and the women were beautiful. She couldn't even find one who was uglier. Even the people who sold fruits on the street could be compared to Pan and, where are we? Ning Xiuma and Shun Jili walked on the street. The streets here seemed to be paved with green jade. It was smooth and comfortable to walk on, looking at the buildings on both sides. They were completely different from the style she had seen before. However, they were extremely beautiful. Every house was so pleasing to the eye. The ageless kingdom. Shun Jili spat out 3 words. Don't they grow old? Ning Xiuma looked around. Indeed, she didn't see any old people or even children. Yes, they won't age, won't die, won't give birth, and won't raise. Shun Jili pointed out the attributes of the people here. Ning Xiuma's eyes brightened. The people here don't need to cultivate and can live forever? I'm so happy. Shun Jili raised his hand and rubbed her head. Don't think about shortcuts. Things that are too easy to get often have fatal flaws. Are you saying that I won't give birth or raise them? That's just one of them. What else? There are many more. All right, we didn't come here to study them. What do you like to eat? The things here are very good. Shun Jili kept his arm around her waist. Not only was the food good, everything here was good. Every item was meticulously crafted, exquisite to the extreme. Even the creases on the bun were like flower buds, exquisite and delicate, whetting one's appetite at a glance. You want to eat that? I'll buy it for you. Shun Jili noticed her gaze and immediately said. Ning Xiuma raised her chin. I'll buy it myself. She was now a rich woman with countless gold and silver on her. It was obviously unrealistic to use banknotes here. Fortunately, she still had some money on her. It was enough for her to eat heartily here. Chapter 903. Ning Xiuma pulled away Shun Jili's hand and ran over alone. She ordered 2 small steamed buns and asked the waiter who was carefully kneading the buns, "How much is it?" The waiter didn't raise his head and only showed her 2 fingers. 2 large coins? Ning Xiuma thought for a moment, then took out a small ingot of silver and placed it on the table that was similarly carved with exquisite carvings. She straightforwardly said, "This is 2 taels of silver. Keep the change." 2 taels of silver was equivalent to 2,000 copper coins. She had plenty of silver now. Seeing that the waiter had spent so much effort carving, she decided to give him more. The handsome waiter finally raised his head and looked at the silver on the table. He then looked at Ning Xiuma, who was about to eat the steamed buns. He looked at her as if he was looking at a monster. "What is this? Why are you trying to fool me with a small tile?" "Tile? This is shining silver, okay. Are the tiles in your house made of silver? Ning Xiumo raised her head and looked at the roofs of the buildings. They were indeed shining with a silver light, as if they were made of silver. There were also a few buildings that were shining with a golden light. It was obvious that they were made of gold. The people here were really rich. The ground was paved with green jade, and the tiles were made of silver and gold. Ning Xiumo looked at the walls again. They were also made of transparent and smooth green jade. It seemed that gold, silver, pearls, and jade couldn't be used as currency here. Then what did they use? Her two tails of silver really looked like a small tile here. Ning Xiumo was embarrassed. A hand as delicate as white jade reached over and placed on the table two round and shiny beads. The little boss smiled and nodded. Thank you. He then lowered his head and folded the bun again. Ning Xiumo raised her head. It was the Almighty who had helped her out of her predicament. Let's go. Shun Jili held her hand and left the steamed bun stall. What kind of beads are the currency here? What kind of material are they made of? Ning Xiumo asked while eating his steamed bun. That's a crystal bead, a kind of jade bead that contains a small amount of spiritual energy. Shun Jili explained to her. He stretched out his fingers, revealing a handful of crystal beads shining with a warm luster in his palm. Ning Xiumo finished the steamed buns in a few bites. She picked up a crystal bead and looked at it. She could faintly sense a faint spiritual aura on it, but she couldn't tell what kind of jade it was. This was another world. She could not use the thinking of her own world to consider the things here. Ning Xiumo stopped talking and began to pay attention to the things that the people around her used to trade. Sure enough, there were pearls of various sizes and colors. She didn't have any of these beads. In other words, she had become a pauper again. Luckily, she had the Almighty by her side. The Almighty was rich and didn't even bat an eyelid when buying things for her. Of course, the things he bought for her were mainly food. Along the way, the two of them bought a variety of specialty snacks. The flavors of the food here might not be all Ning Xiumo's favorite, but it was true that everything was extremely exquisite. It seemed that the people here were especially obsessed with perfection. Even a stick of sugar-coated haws had a unique shape. There were even flowers carved on it. After walking around, Ning Xiumo ate this and that. Unknowingly, she ate until she was full. However, she hadn't even eaten a third of the specialty snacks here. The people here really aren't ordinary. They're clever with their hands and are extremely patient. Even a meatball can be made to look like a crystal ball. At this moment, Ning Xiumo was sitting on a bench by the roadside to digest her food. She could not help but sigh. Chapter 904. They're too bored, Shun Jili replied. Ning Xiumo was stunned. She thought about their immortal lives and how they had no concept of life and death. So they developed all kinds of interests to do the most meticulous work to kill time? That's possible. Since they don't lack anything, why do they need those crystal beads? Although they don't age and die, it's only when there's no external force and their living conditions are met. Their bodies have a kind of defect that needs to be compensated with crystal beads. They need to eat a few crystal beads a day to maintain their body's needs. Only then can they live for a long time. You're saying that they need to absorb the spiritual power of the crystal beads to live? I see that the spiritual power between heaven and earth is very abundant here. Why don't they directly cultivate and absorb it? Ning Xiumo was a very observant person. She could feel the abundant spiritual power here. Their physiques are not suitable for any kind of cultivation. It seemed that they weren't very happy. They also had their shortcomings. Ning Xiumo suddenly didn't envy them. So what if they had a long life? What was the point of living like a pool of stagnant water? It was even more boring. She naturally liked to take risks. Although she was always rolling on the line between life and death after transmigrating, her life was very colorful. She never felt that life was difficult. Where did they get these crystal beads? Ning Xiumo picked up a crystal bead to study. In the mountains 100 miles away from the city, there's a kind of mineral deposit. There are strange beasts in the mountains. It's not easy to collect them, Shun Jili explained. He pulled her up. Let's go. I'll show you something else. At this moment, Ning Xuema's little bit of resentment towards Shun Juli for losing the chess game had already disappeared. She followed beside Shun Juli, her eyes shining. What is it? There were many strange things in this country. Shun Juli also bought her a lot. There were cloaks, clothes, jade bracelets. There were simply too many. Fortunately, he gave her a storage bag. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to store so many things. Because the people here were extremely beautiful, Shun Juli and Ning Xuema were not too conspicuous walking on the street. Shun Juli cast a little spell to cover their specific appearances. Then, he took her to wander around so that they would not attract too much attention. However, Shun Juli was born with a special temperament. That kind of natural elegance and nobility was not something that people here could have. In addition, he was extremely generous. As long as Ning Xuema liked something, no matter how many crystal beads it cost, he would buy it without blinking his eyes. Ning Xuema finally experienced the feeling of having a sugar daddy. She also realized that most of the people here were relatively poor because when these people bought things, most of them bought 1 or 2 crystal beads. Once the number of crystals exceeded 10, he would consider it again and again. Moreover, there were also luxury goods here, and the prices were not cheap. Ning Xuema saw a couple with her own eyes. The woman took a fancy to a crystal bracelet and asked for 12 crystal beads. The man immediately pulled the woman away, causing the woman to be very unhappy. She kept looking at the bracelet reluctantly. Ning Xuema could not help but look at the floating gauze hanging on her arm that was lighter than the sunlight. It seemed that this bracelet only cost 1,000 crystal beads, not to mention the other things that he bought for her. There were even more than 10,000 crystal beads in it. Shun Juli spent money like water, which naturally attracted some people's attention. Chapter 905. People began to follow them from behind. People began to whisper and point at them. Shun Juli did not care about these gazes. He pulled Ning Xuema and walked around freely. Great God! Where did you get so many crystal beads? Ning Xuema wanted to go into his storage space to take a look. She wanted to see how many world currencies there were inside. I earned them, Shun Juli replied. It was good to have skills. No matter where you went, you could become a person above others. For example, the Great God. Although he was not as famous in the immortal country as he was in the original continent, he still lived a very comfortable and relaxed life. He had a lot of treasures and was not afraid of thieves. She turned her head and glanced back. Then she smiled. Great God, you're too high profile. There are 3 thieves following behind you. Shun Juli was too lazy to turn around. If they don't find it tiring, then let them follow. You already noticed? Nonsense. With his high cultivation, how could he not notice that someone was following them? Ning Xuema naturally did not care about the thieves. She and Shun Juli walked while chatting casually. There was suddenly a gust of wind behind them. A person charged in between Ning Xuema and Shun Juli. Shun Juli casually pulled Ning Xuema into his arms. Then he turned his body sideways, causing the man to miss and fly away. He was lying on the ground. This fall was not light. He struggled on the ground and could not get up for a while. He turned his head to look at Ning Xuema and Shun Juli with tears in his eyes. It was a very beautiful youth. He had big eyes and double eyelids. He was more delicate than a little girl. The handsome young man's teary eyes made people feel pity for him at first glance. Does it hurt? Ning Xuema wanted to do a good deed. She helped him up and patted the dirt off his body. Be careful when you walk. Thank you, big sister. That young man looked very young, even younger than Ning Xuema, so it was not difficult for him to call her sister. Ning Xuema patted his shoulder again. You're welcome. Go ahead. From now on, you have to walk the right path. Her words had a double meaning. The young man vaguely thanked her and turned to run away. Ning Xuema clapped her hands, as if she had just done a good deed, which made her feel refreshed. When she turned around, she saw Shun Juli looking at her with his arms crossed and a faint smile on his face. Ning Xuema shrugged. Guru, why are you looking at me like that? Shun Juli slowly walked over and cast a cleansing spell on her. Ning Xuema shuddered. She felt as if she had been washed from head to toe. You I remember someone saying that men and women shouldn't touch each other. Shunjuli's tone was flat, and no one could guess his emotions. Then what were you doing just now? The person she helped up was a handsome young man. Ning Shuima was startled. She didn't expect him to be waiting for her here. She tilted her head and looked at him. The ancestor's handsome face was as calm as always, and he didn't reveal his emotions. Was the guru jealous? Ning Shuima suddenly felt a little funny. She simply hugged her arms and said with a smile, "Guru, I'm doing a good deed. I'm learning from Lei Feng. When I do good deeds, I don't care if the other party is male or female, ugly or handsome." Good deeds? Shunjuli walked forward and slowly pried open her clenched left hand. There were more than 10 crystal beads rolling in her snow-white palm. You call stealing other people's things good deeds? Ning Xiuma coughed. She didn't expect her small movements to be seen by the guru. Chapter 906. Ning Xiuma said confidently, "He pretended to bump into me and stole mine first. So she took advantage of the situation and stole it back. She was the ancestor of the emptiness magic hands. That person took advantage of the situation and took 3 of her crystal beads. She took more than 10 of them back. Well, what do you mean by a good person?" Shinjuli cast the cleansing spell on her again without batting an eyelid. He had no choice. He had a serious obsession with cleanliness, and he wanted to hold her. This time, he did it more gently, and Ning Xiuma didn't notice it for a moment. She still said confidently, "This person didn't learn to be a good thief at such a young age. I stole his crystal beads to teach him a lesson. Maybe he will go on the right path in the future." She raised her head and saw a jade shop not too far away. Ning Xiuma suddenly had a bright idea and pulled him into the shop. The jade shop was not big, and the decoration was not luxurious. Usually, Shunjuli would never go to such a shop, but Ning Xiuma pulled him in. "Let's go in." It was rare for her to take the initiative to hold his hand. In this country, green jade was a common stone, and white jade was a more precious kind of jade. Sapphires were also rare. Ning Xiuma looked for a long time and chose a deep sapphire pin. She asked for 15 crystal beads. Shunjuli was about to take out the money, but Ning Xiuma pulled his sleeve and signaled him not to move. Then she and the shop owner bargained. Under her persuasion, the shop owner, who never gave in, finally agreed to give her 3 crystal beads. In the end, the deal was made with 12 crystal beads. Shunjuli was an expert. He looked at the sapphire and said sincerely, "There are some impurities in it, and the workmanship is a bit rough. If you like this, I can take you." He didn't finish his words. This was because Ning Xiuma had pinned the sapphire on his lapel. When she lowered her head and busied herself in front of him, a faint fragrance wafted into his nose, causing him to be dazed for a moment. He vaguely felt as if he had experienced this scene before. Ning Xiuma took a step back and sized him up. His white robe was without any impurities. Now that he had this sapphire pinned on his collar, it had a different kind of eye-catching effect. It also made him look more human. Julie looked down at the sapphire and suddenly realized that the sapphire was unprecedentedly beautiful. "So you bought it for me?" Ning Xiuma handed her crystal beads to the boss and pulled him out. "I'm poor now, so I can't afford to buy you a good one. I'll buy you a high-end one in the future." She was considered a pauper in this mystical country, and these crystal beads were all she had. It was her money. Shinjuli touched the sapphire with his fingers. It felt cool. Ning Xiuma knew that he had always pursued perfection. He didn't even accept disciples or grand disciples with average looks. This showed how picky he was. This sapphire pinned on her lapel probably wouldn't be good enough for him. Thinking about it, he casually gave her a cloak that cost more than 1,000 crystal beads. Her crystal beads were indeed not worth it. He probably didn't want to wear it, right? Ning Xiuma sighed. "Forget it if you don't like it." She was about to say that if he didn't like it, he could just take it off. Unexpectedly, Shinjuli pinned a sapphire on his lapel and adjusted it. He even covered it with a faint layer of psychokinesis, making it impossible for her to take it off. "No, I like it." Chapter 907. Although Shun Julie's voice was still faint, there was a kind of gentleness in it. Ning Shuama's heart skipped a beat. She had bought this for him on a whim. She wanted to give him something that she had bought with her own money. Later, she realized that it was a little inappropriate. She probably stepped on the bottom line of the D-Zune's items. Seeing him like this, her heart was slightly warm. She was still holding Shun Julie's hand. His hand was slightly cold, but Ning Shuama felt as if there was a warm current passing through his fingers and directly into her heart. It was originally an ordinary sapphire, but because it was worn on the great god's lapel, and because he had used his psychokinesis to protect it, it shone with a blue light. In an instant, it was upgraded by several grades. When the two of them came out of the store, the two thieves who had been following them finally couldn't help but make a move. First, they were noisy behind them, and then they started to fight. The one who was beaten up couldn't seem to stop and rushed towards the D-Zune. He took the opportunity to pull the sapphire on the D-Zune's lapel. But before his hand could touch the D-Zune's lapel, his whole body suddenly flew out horizontally. With a bang, he fell on the green jade floor and was disoriented. He didn't even know how he flew out. He wanted to get up, but his hands and feet were soft like noodles. He couldn't move at all. He looked up in horror and stared at Shinjuli. "You," Shinjuli said indifferently, "you won't be able to steal again. Once you break this rule, your hands and feet will be broken, and you will never be able to recover." He pulled Ning Shuama's hand again and ignored the two thieves. "Let's go." He held Ning Shuama's hand and left hand in hand. The thief's companion originally wanted to rush over and argue, but seeing this, he decisively stopped. After Shun, Julie, and Yi Futian left, he walked over to help his friend up. Strangely, after Shun, Julie left, the thief's hands and feet could move again. He moved around on the spot, and after confirming that his hands and feet were fine and there was no discomfort, he was overjoyed. He immediately pulled his companion away. "Let's go. Let's go somewhere else and steal again." His companion was still worried, but that person just now said that if you steal again, your limbs will be broken. How could there be such a thing? He was just bluffing. "Do you think I'm a pushover?" The man didn't care at all and dragged his companion away. 2 hours later, he was lying in an alley, screaming miserably. His limbs had completely turned soft and slender, and he could no longer move. Of course, Ning Shuama did not see these subsequent developments. At this moment, she was standing in front of a weapon shop, holding a pair of Immerse piercers, unwilling to let go. He didn't know what material the pair of Immerse piercers were made of, but the whole body was shining with a soft moonlight. The style of the handle was very ancient and elegant, and it felt very good to the touch. It was surprisingly suitable. The shop owner next to them was a cool young man. He was a man of few words. When Ning Shuama was fiddling with a pair of Immerse piercers, he just watched from the side. He only said one sentence to the ancestor: "I'll cast this blade on time. Your Excellency can pay the bill now." Ning Shuama's expression changed. These Immerse piercers were specially made for her by the great god. The blade looked as thin and brittle as colored glass. It was indeed exquisite, but could it be just an ornament that was only good for looking at, but useless? Ning Shuama carefully flicked the blade. She didn't dare to use too much strength, for fear that her finger would break it. Her careful appearance probably stimulated the cool swordsmith. He suddenly stretched out his hand to Ning Shuama. "Give it to me." Chapter 908. What do you want to do? Ning Shuama casually handed one of them to the blacksmith. The blacksmith took it, and without even looking at it, he stabbed it into a large piece of green jade on the side. The Immerse piercer went in as easily as piercing tofu. It didn't even make a sound. Ning Shuama's heart skipped a beat. She deliberately went forward to touch the green jade. The green jade was extremely hard and had the highest hardness. She then pulled out the Immerse piercer and easily pulled it out. It didn't take much effort at all. It really was a treasure blade. If it could pierce green jade so easily, it could definitely cut through gold and iron. She pulled out a strand of hair and blew it at the blade. Before the hair touched the blade, it was cut in half. The blacksmith proudly said, It's made of 1,000-year-old moonlight iron. It can cut through any weapon. It can pierce through any cultivation body. It was this powerful. Not only was it a divine weapon, it was also a magical tool. Although Ning Xiuma didn't know what this moonlight iron was, from the sharpness of this treasure and the blacksmith's serious attitude, she knew that this metal was definitely not ordinary. Moonlight iron is like moonlight. It comes from Moonlight Mountain. A piece the size of a fingernail is already priceless. The moonlight iron used to make this weapon weighs several kilograms. There is only one piece in the world. Its value is immeasurable. The blacksmith saw that Ning Xiuma didn't seem to know the origin of the moonlight iron and couldn't help but explain. His voice was still cool. In Bulow City, only this one dares to take this job. Ning Xiuma's heart skipped a beat. Great God! Did you personally get this moonlight iron? Shinjuli lightly said, I just happened to pass by and get it. It's useless to just leave it there. Your martial arts are so bad, it's not bad to use it to protect yourself. He said it so casually, as if it was just a piece of scrap metal. The blacksmith looked at him with a constipated expression. Just leave it there? This kind of high-quality moonlight iron was hard to find even in the entire Bulow country. He had lived for tens of thousands of years and had never seen a second piece. When he saw it, he was stunned. He rubbed his eyes several times and carefully looked at it 3 or 4 times before confirming that it was real. He almost didn't dare to take this job because this item was too precious, even more precious than the Emperor's imperial jade seal. Once someone saw it, it would cause a huge commotion in Bulow City. Countless people would covet it and fight over it. Even the monarch of Bulow City would miss it. That was why he didn't dare to let anyone know about it after he took on the job. A special workshop was specially built for it. There were no windows, only a small sealed door that could only allow one person to enter. The interior was decorated with extremely strong soundproofing materials. He dared not work during the day and took other jobs as usual. In the dead of the night, when there was no one around to disturb him, he would enter the secret workshop and forge a piece that was 1,000 times more meticulous than embroidery. After expending a great deal of effort, he finally succeeded. This was the work he was most satisfied with so far. It was the crystallization of his blood, sweat, and tears. Just looking at him gave him a sense of pride. Ning Xiuma didn't know about the swordsmith's hard work. She was holding it in her hands and admiring it. With a slight wave of his hand, it was as if he had waved a circle of moonlight, shining brilliantly. She looked at the workmanship again. The proportions were perfect, and it was neither light nor heavy. It was perfect from the big parts to the small carvings on it. The workmanship was ridiculously fine. She was moved. Boss, how long did you take to forge this weapon? It seemed that this kind of workmanship wasn't done in a day. Chapter 909. Ning Xiuma felt that it would take at least 3 to 5 years to complete the Immerse piercer. The blacksmith said proudly, 30 years, 30 years. Ning Xiuma's heart skipped a beat. She had only known the Almighty for a few months. It seemed like this one-of-a-kind divine weapon was not specially made for her. It was obvious that this weapon was specially made for girls. Then who was he custom-made for 30 years ago? Yi Qingwan? Or Yunxi? Or some other female friend of the Almighty that she did not know yet? Or his future wife? She suddenly realized that she knew almost nothing about the Almighty. She slowly put down the Immerse piercer. Why? You don't like it? Shinjuli raised his eyebrows. He thought that when Xiumo received this gift, she would be so happy that she would jump up and down. He didn't expect that she would have this kind of indifferent expression on her face. Ning Xiumo smiled and said straightforwardly, the Almighty prepared this for someone else, right? I don't want to steal someone else's beauty. She suddenly had an idea. If this had been prepared for Yunxi, it would have been hard to say. If it had been prepared for Yi Qingwan, then she should steal someone else's beauty. That damn person would die of anger. She did not want to have such a high style. Almighty, who did you prepare this treasure for? She prayed that the Almighty did not give it to Yi Qingwan. Otherwise, she would not hesitate to snatch it away. Shinjili glanced at her and put the weapon in his storage space. He said indifferently, since you don't want it, you don't need to know who I prepared it for. Ning Xuema was speechless. She had lost a treasure because of her pride. TSK, he did not want to give it to her in the first place. He only wanted to let her try it out. He was like a domineering CEO in modern times who brought his secretary to buy a gift for her. Of course, the gift was for someone else. The more she thought about it, the more she could not take it lying down. She asked the shop owner, "Where is Moonlight Mountain?" She wanted to get a piece of this metal and forge it. Shinjuli's eyes flickered. He guessed what she meant, but he did not say anything. The blacksmith looked her up and down and shook his head. Difficult, difficult, difficult. Ning Xuema. What do you mean? You can't go up the Moonlight Mountain unless you're a heaven stage psychokinesis master. Mrs. Psychokinesis should be around Earth stage level 2. The difference is too great, not to mention looking for the Moonlight Iron. Even if you find that mountain, you won't be able to go up. Who would have thought that this swordsmith would have such sharp eyes? But there should be very few people with heaven-rank psychokinesis, right? Perhaps there were many in the Bulow country. After all, the people here were immortal and had endless time to cultivate. There should be a large number of people who have reached this level, right? Do you really want to go to Yueguang Mountain? Shinjuli looked at her with a faint smile. I can send you up there. The swordsmith's expression changed. He looked at Shinjuli and frowned. So what if we can go up? The guardian beast of Moonlight Mountain will also eat her. Shinjuli crossed his arms and looked at Ning Xuema. There is indeed a guardian beast on Moonlight Mountain. The Moonlight Pterosaur, an Earth Stage Level 8 beast. It is good at fire attacks, can hide, and is as fast as lightning. It is also known as the Electric Beast. He quickly explained the characteristics of this beast. Are you sure you want to go? Was he trying to provoke her? Ning Xuema quickly analyzed the characteristics of this beast in her mind. She smiled and said straightforwardly yes. As long as you can send me up there. Chapter 9-10. The swordsmith was shocked. Was this little girl looking for death? Who wants to go to Moonlight Mountain? A clear female voice suddenly came from outside the door. If you can find 10 taels of Moonlight Iron, this king will give you 10 million crystals. Everyone turned around when they heard this. The door curtain was lifted and 2 beautiful maids came in first. They bent down and opened the door curtain. There was a young girl dressed in luxurious clothes. She was beautiful and unparalleled. Her aura was not small. When the swordsmith saw this woman, his expression changed slightly. He bowed down, Your Majesty. That woman was the king of the Immortal Kingdom. She nodded slightly and ignored the swordsmith. Her eyes swept over Ning Xuema and finally landed on Shinjuli. A trace of surprise flashed through her eyes. Shinjuli used a technique to hide his appearance and aura. The people here could not see his true appearance. The queen believed that her eyes were sharp enough to see a person's cultivation level, but she could not see his. She faintly felt that this man's cultivation level was deep and profound. It was like a vast ocean that no one could see through. Your Majesty is a heaven-rank cultivator? The queen's eyes sparkled. Shinjuli was too lazy to answer her. He was too lazy to waste his breath on people he was not interested in. Ning Xuema also crossed her arms and watched from the side. She did not think that she would meet the queen while shopping. How dare you? Our queen is talking to you. How can you not answer? You. One of the maids sternly scolded. However, before she could finish her words, Shinjuli glanced at her indifferently. Just one glance was enough to freeze the maidservant. Her heart fiercely trembled, and she could not say anything else. Shinjuli was too lazy to deal with people. He pulled Ning Xuema's hand. Let's go. This was probably the first time that the queen had been ignored so thoroughly. Her pretty face blushed slightly, and her eyes flashed with a hint of sternness, but she immediately hid it. She flashed in front of Shinjuli and Yang Kai. If the two of you can obtain more than 10 taels of Moonlight Iron, this queen will give you 20 million crystal stones. Shinjuli remained unmoved. He lowered his eyes slightly and waved his sleeve. The queen could not help but stagger a few steps to the side. Shinjuli held Ning Xuema's hand and walked out. Queen, The two maids' pretty faces were filled with shock. The queen's kung fu was the strongest in the immortal kingdom, but she didn't expect the man in front of her to be able to force her to take a few steps back so easily. Who was this man? This skill was simply heaven-defying. The queen was clearly shocked as well, but her eyes were filled with joy. She took a few steps forward and said, "Please wait. This queen is in urgent need of moonlight iron. If the two of you can bring the iron this queen needs, I am willing to give you 30 million crystal stones." This number was simply a sky-high price. The blacksmith had spent 30 years to make the Immerse piercer for the ancestor, and the cost was only 100,000 crystal stones. The queen was willing to take out 30 million crystal stones. It was clear that she had invested a lot. It seemed like she was determined to obtain this moonlight iron. Ning Shuma's footsteps stopped. She simply said, 40 million. 40 million crystal stones. We will find it for you. 10 taels of moonlight iron was only half a caddy. In other words, a piece the size of a pigeon egg would be enough. It shouldn't be too hard. Should she find it? She was in a moonlight mountain to find iron anyways. Finding a piece for the queen to make a fortune wasn't a bad idea. She didn't want to be a pauper here. She wanted to use her own hands to grab her first bucket of gold. If she could obtain 40 million crystal stones, Ning Shuma would become a rich woman here. Chapter 9:11. The queen let out a sigh of relief. She had obviously gone crazy over the moonlight iron and agreed without any hesitation. However, she would only pay after she saw the goods. After a round of haggling, the queen finally agreed to pay 50,000 crystals as a down payment. The rest would be paid after she saw the goods. Both sides agreed on a month. Once Ning Shuma obtained the moonlight iron, she would inform the queen. The queen left with her two maids in satisfaction. The swordsmith secretly shook his head and spat out 4 words. "She's going crazy over a man." Ning Shuma turned around and knocked on his head. "What do you mean?" 40 million crystals, more than half of the national treasury. The queen really went crazy for that man. The swordsmith couldn't help but vent his dissatisfaction. The queen did it for a man? What kind of man was worth the queen doing this for? Ning Shuma and the swordsmith exchanged a few words. From the swordsmith, Ning Shuma learned a bit of gossip about the queen. It turned out that 20 years ago, a handsome man came to the immortal kingdom. This man was good at music. The queen fell in love with him at first sight and wanted him to be her husband. She wanted to use the power of the whole kingdom to please him. This man came to Immortal City to look for the moonlight iron. However, this was something that could only be found by chance. He searched the entire Immortal City, but couldn't find it. Moreover, he was seriously injured and couldn't go to Moonlight Mountain. When the queen heard about this, she used all kinds of methods to find this thing for him. She had already reached the point where she didn't care about the cost. Using the power of the whole kingdom to please one person, this queen had the shadow of King Yu of Zhou. King Yu of Zhou teased his vassals in order to win the beauty's smile. The queen also didn't care about the cost to please the handsome man. The people of the immortal kingdom were all good-looking. The queen was also outstanding. What kind of man could make her so infatuated with him? To be honest, Ning Shuma was a bit curious. The swordsmith didn't want to talk too much about his king. After a few words, he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He only gave a few reminders out of kindness. He said that there was no one in the entire immortal kingdom who had reached the heaven realm. There were people who reached the 9th level of the earth realm who went to Moonlight Mountain and used a special method to climb up. However, they never came back down after they went up. That was why the price of moonlight iron was so exorbitant. Therefore, it was impossible for Ning Shuma to find outside help. They could only rely on themselves. He said all this to let Ning Shuma understand how difficult the task she had taken on was. Ning Shuma had actually understood how rare moonlight iron was when the queen had raised the price with all her might, so she had only smiled at the swordsmith's reminder. He looked at Shinjuli with bright eyes. "Guru, will you send me up?" Shinjuli was speechless. This girl was so eager to agree to the queen's deal. How much money did she need? Did she know how hard it was to find moonlight iron? He said leisurely, "All right. However, I will not help you search for it. You'll have to rely on yourself when you get to the top." He wanted to bring her to Mount Yuiguan to train, and this was a good opportunity. Within the majestic Bulow City Imperial Palace, the curtain made by shark men fluttered in the wind. A red-clothed man reclined on a white jade bed. His eyebrows were like cold smoke, and his eyes were like autumn waves. He was as elegant as a poem, and as handsome as a painting. Beside him was a blue guqin. The guqin was overflowing with colors. Among the 7 strings, one of them was a strange bright red color, as if it had drunk enough blood. It made sounds without any wind, and from time to time, it would emit strange cries. Chapter 9:12. The sound of the zither was vague and awe-inspiring. It was as if there were countless souls struggling inside. That red-clothed man used his fingers to gently play the zither. His brows were slightly furrowed and his eyes were deep. When the unaging queen came in and saw this scene, she waved her hand, and the maid beside her silently withdrew. "Brother Shui, are you feeling better today?" The queen walked over, and her voice was incredibly gentle. That man only cared about playing the zither and didn't pay attention to her. The queen's eyes flashed with hidden bitterness, but she immediately smiled and said, "Brother Shui, this king sees that your complexion is much better today. Many thanks." That red-clothed man finally spat out these 2 words. He slowly got up, and with a wave of his sleeve, the blue zither disappeared into his sleeve. He seemed to be really tired of lying down and got off the bed. The queen immediately walked over. "Brother Shui, I'll help you wash up." That red-clothed man pulled the corner of his lips and waved her away with a wave of his sleeve. "No need." He lowered his eyes and looked at his wrinkled red clothes. He frowned slightly and pointed at himself. A faint red light flashed, and his red clothes regained their brilliance. "Brother Shui's martial arts have also recovered. Is this a cleansing spell? It really is mysterious." The queen didn't miss the opportunity to praise him. That red-clothed man seemed to give a lazy smile. He was born very beautiful, and his smile was like a flower blooming. The queen looked at him with infatuation. "Brother Shui." The red-clothed man walked to the table and sat down. He used his fingers to comb his long hair. His every movement was graceful and full of charm. The queen couldn't move her eyes away. Her eyes became even more infatuated. She couldn't help but walk over and pick up the jade comb beside her. "Brother Shui, I'll comb your hair for you." The red-robed man's eyes turned cold. "No." Just as he was about to say, "No need," the queen had already faintly interrupted him. "Brother Shui, you're still not willing?" There was a suppressed resentment and anger in her voice. She was the ruler of the unaging country, after all. She still had the pride of a ruler in her bones. That red-clothed man finally looked at her and revealed a smile that wasn't a smile. "If I'm not willing, what will you do?" The queen was stunned by his smile and muttered, "Of course. Of course I won't do anything. That's a good boy." The man in red stood up and ruffled her hair. "I like obedient girls." He paused for a moment and then asked casually, "You still didn't find anything today?" The queen's soul almost left her body when he touched her. She couldn't wait to grab his hand and kiss it. At the same time, she finally remembered the purpose of her visit. "All right, the moonlight iron that you want might be available soon." The red-clothed man raised his head, his eyes bright. "What do you mean?" The queen then briefly recounted her encounter with Ning Xiuma and the deal they had made. Finally, he said, "I think they are reliable. Perhaps they can really succeed." After listening to her, the man in red said lazily, "The ignorant are fearless. Recently, there have been too many people who have died for money. Brother Shui, I know you feel sorry for the innocent people who lost their lives when they went to get the iron, but you have to let someone try. What if it succeeds?" Does he feel sorry for those innocent people who lost their lives? The red-robed man's lips twitched again. She finally understood, okay? He had never felt sorry for anyone's death. Chapter 9:13. An Earth Stage Level 2 dares to take on this kind of task? You're just throwing your life away," he said bluntly. A few days ago, there were also a few groups of people who agreed to do this job for the sake of money. However, they were all Earth rank level 8 and above. There were even 2 people who had reached Earth rank level 9, but they still left valiantly. Then, they were like meat buns thrown to dogs, never to return. Those people didn't succeed. How could an Earth stage level 2 girl succeed? What a joke! This time, the red-clothed man didn't have any hope. He lowered his eyes to test his psychokinesis, and his fingers tightened slightly. He had at most recovered 3/4 of his power, which was barely the power of an Earth stage level 9 expert. If he went up now, the risk would be huge, but his matter was urgent. Instead of waiting hopelessly, he might as well take the risk and fight. He didn't want to waste any more time here. He was about to say goodbye, but the Queen's words made his heart skip a beat. That girl naturally can't do it. But her companion's cultivation is broad and profound. With that man's help, maybe this matter can succeed. What's the man's cultivation? The Queen shook her head. I can't tell. That person seems to be hiding his strength. The red-clothed man raised his eyebrows. Although the people of the Immortal Kingdom couldn't cultivate high psychokinesis, they had a special ability that could see the level of a person's psychokinesis. The stronger the person, the clearer they could see. The Queen was the leader among them. She could even see the level of a person's cultivation. She had never heard of a person that she couldn't see through, but now there was one. What does that man look like? The red-clothed man was finally a little interested. The Queen paused and shook her head. I can't see clearly. That person didn't wear any mask, but she couldn't see his face. She only felt that he was very handsome and had an aura. The red-clothed man's expression changed slightly, and his fingers clenched in his sleeves. Could it be that person? That didn't seem right. That person didn't get close to women. There shouldn't be a girl by his side, unless that girl was Ning Xiuma. No, Ning Xiuma's psychokinesis was only at human stage level 5 or 6. It was impossible for her to reach Earth stage level 2 in such a short time. Then was it them or not? You can't see that man clearly, but you should be able to see that woman clearly, right? What does she look like? The red-clothed man asked calmly. The Queen was startled for a moment and immediately became jealous. Brother Shui, that girl is just an ordinary girl. Yuan, the red-clothed man suddenly called out the Queen's nickname. His voice was gentle. I just want to know their identities. I have no other intentions. Is that girl about 15 or 16 years old and has a hexagonal cinnabar mole between her eyebrows? The Queen's soul melted when she heard him call her Yuan. She couldn't help but nod. Yes, she does have a snow-white cinnabar mole between her eyebrows. Brother Shui, do you know her? The red-robed man's eyes drooped. How could he just know him? There seemed to be wind and clouds swirling in the depths of his dark eyes. But when he raised his head again, it was as calm as the wind. He seemed to be a little dispirited. Got it. He waved his hand again. I'm going into seclusion for a month. I don't want anyone to disturb me. It was obvious that he was chasing him away. Although the Queen was somewhat unwilling, she still did not dare to offend him, so she said a few more words of concern before leaving. Chapter 9:14. When she was about to leave, the Queen paused. Brother Shui, if those 2 people find the moonlight iron within 30 days, should I inform you immediately? The man in red said faintly, No need. I may not even be in seclusion for a month. The length is uncertain. In short, before I come out of seclusion, no one is to disturb me. His gaze fell on the Queen's face, his gaze gentle. Yuan, you can do it, right? The Queen agreed and finally left reluctantly. Not only would she not disturb her lover's practice, she would also send a large number of troops to protect him, ensuring that nothing would go wrong during his seclusion. When she left, she even considerately closed the window for him. The Queen's back disappeared outside the door. The man in red's eyes were cold with disgust. He lowered his head and thought for a moment. Then his figure flashed and disappeared. Ning Xiuma finally understood why only heaven rankers could go up the Moonlight Mountain. It was because it was a mountain suspended in the air. The mountain was thousands of feet high, piercing through the clouds. The top and bottom could not be seen. The bottom of the mountain was a black, ink-colored sea of clouds. The Moonlight Mountain was in the middle of the black sea of clouds. It was faintly shining like the moon, like a jade plate held out from the dark clouds. The scenery was surprisingly beautiful. Ning Xiuma kicked down a millstone-sized rock beside her, wanting to hear the echo to measure the depth below. However, when the big rock came into contact with the black clouds, it melted and disappeared as if it came into contact with strong sulfuric acid. In other words, the black clouds could not be touched at all. The mountain that Ning Xiuma was standing on was the closest to it, but it was still a few thousand meters away. If one did not know how to ride the clouds, one would not be able to reach it at all. However, it seemed that when one cultivated to Earth rank level 6, one could ride a sword and fly. Since it was said that only heaven rankers could do it, there would definitely be other situations ahead. It's not too late for you to regret it now, Shinjili said. Ning Xiuma raised her eyebrows. I never knew how to write the word regret. Then do you have a way to deal with the guardian beast above? Different situations call for different measures. Ning Xiuma shook her head. She had yet to see what the mythological beast looked like, nor had she fought with it, so she was unable to formulate a specific battle strategy. Going with the flow and adapting to the situation was her strong suit. However, after hearing about the characteristics of the Moonlight Pterosaur, she had a rough plan in her mind, so she wasn't completely unprepared. What an impulsive girl! Shinjili knocked on her head rudely. Ning Xiuma snorted, I just don't want to take advantage of others. When she thought of the pair of Amei piercings, she felt as if a thorn was stuck in her heart. You're ambitious. I like it. Shinjili reached out and grabbed her. Since that's the case, I'll send you up. He pulled her up into the air and flew towards the Moonlight Mountain. Ning Xiuma had just flown above the black sea of clouds when she felt as if there was a huge force sucking her in from below. Her body instantly became as heavy as iron. Shinjili hugged her. She felt as if her lower body was about to be torn apart by the suction force. This black sea of clouds was simply like a black hole in the universe. It seemed that those who only knew how to ride a sword and fly wouldn't be able to pass through this place. They would be directly sucked down. She couldn't help but tug at the corner of Shinjili's clothes, fearing that he wouldn't be able to hold her and throw her down. Fortunately, Shinjili's martial arts had never disappointed anyone. When he carried her and flew up, his face was still calm and relaxed, as if it wasn't strenuous at all. Chapter 9:15. Are you scared? Shinjili's lips curled into a smile as she clung onto his body tightly. Shinjili was pleased. I'm not scared. Ning Xiuma raised her eyebrows and looked at him. I know you won't throw me down. Shinjili's heart skipped a beat. Did she finally trust him again? He tightened his arms around her and promised, yes, I won't leave you behind no matter what. It was a very ordinary promise, but it made Ning Xiuma's heart warm. She finally asked the question that had been hovering in her heart. Great God, in the end, who do you want to give that pair of Amei piercings to? Who in the world had such good fortune? Would you believe me if I said that I wanted to give it to you? Shinjili looked at her with a deep gaze. I don't believe you. Ning Xiuma replied straightforwardly. That swordsmith forged it for 30 years. I wasn't even born 30 years ago. Who was he trying to fool? Guru, are you trying to say that you have the ability to predict the future? You knew that you would meet me, so you prepared it in advance? I do have the ability to predict the future, but you are an exception, Shinjili replied slowly. He had never been able to see through her fate. A fortune teller couldn't predict their own fate, so he couldn't see his own either. However, he was too lazy to do so. If fate was determined by the heavens, there was no point in knowing in advance. It was only interesting when everything was unknown. His fate had always been decided by himself, so it didn't matter if he could predict it or not. If you can't predict the future, then why did you prepare this for me 30 years in advance? Ning Xiuma wanted to get to the bottom of it. I might not have told you, but a day in our world is a year here. Shinjili replied slowly. Ning Xiuma was speechless. Wouldn't 30 years here be 30 days in her world? What stage was she and the guru at 30 days ago? It seemed like when the guru used Han Shanyue's identity to take her in as a concubine. So he had been preparing a weapon for her since then. Ning Xuema's heart warmed slightly. She was a little embarrassed. Why didn't you say so earlier? If she had known this earlier, she wouldn't have come here in a fit of anger. Do you regret coming here? Do you want me to bring you back? Shin Julie took in the look on her face. Ning Xiuma shook her head. No, I want to go. There was no turning back. She had always been someone who would rather break than bend. She was now very curious about the Moonlight Mountain. She also wanted to find a piece of moonlight iron to forge a weapon for the Almighty as a return gift. Moreover, she had promised the Queen that she would also find a piece of moonlight iron for her. The Moonlight Pterosaur is best at fire attacks, while you are a wood attack. Wood breeds fire, so your attacks will only increase its fierceness, not restrain it. You don't know how to use water attacks, so you'd better use fire attacks to deal with it. I'm going to teach you a set of fire attack spells now. Whether you can understand it in time depends on you. Shen Jili began to explain the characteristics of the Moonlight Pterosaur and the methods to deal with it. At this time, Ning Xiuma listened very carefully. Her memory was very good, so she remembered almost everything Shen Jili said once. What Ning Xiuma didn't know was that when she and Shen Jili flew away from the mountain, a man in red appeared. His gaze fell on Ning Xiuma's back, and his eyes showed a complicated expression. Chapter 9:16. The man in red slowly clenched his fists in his sleeves and said in a low voice, Momo, you are mine. We missed each other in our previous life, but we won't meet again in this life. Ning Xiuma felt that if there was a ranking of the most deceptive places, this Moonlight Mountain would definitely be at the top. She had never seen such a deceptive place before. There were stones all over the mountain, glowing stones big and small, round, sharp, flat. There were more of them than the stars in the sky. Although the appearance of the stones were different, the color was the same. Every one of them glowed with moonlight, giving people the illusion that the entire valley was filled with luminous pearls. Shinjili told her that the moonlight iron was among these stones. Only by picking them up would one be able to tell whether they were moonlight stones or moonlight iron. If one didn't pick them up, one wouldn't be able to tell. This wasn't the most deceptive thing. The most deceptive thing was that every time she picked up a stone, an Earth-ranked level 8 Moonlight Pterosaur would appear out of thin air. The disturbed Moonlight Pterosaur was like an enraged lion, attacking the culprit who disturbed their beautiful dreams. The ancestor was a man of his words. After sending her up, he kindly reminded her that she could only pick up one stone at a time, or else she would have to bear the consequences. Then, he leisurely sat at the side and arranged a chessboard on a rather flat rock. He played chess with himself for fun, leaving her to be chased by the Moonlight Pterosaur all over the mountain. The Moonlight Pterosaur was about the same size as the legendary pterosaur, but its whole body was the color of moonlight. When it flapped its wings, raging flames would cover the sky. Although this beast's body was sturdy and looked rather clumsy, its speed was unbelievably fast, just like lightning flashing. Ning Xiuma's expeditious steps was unparalleled in the world, but when she encountered this beast, her hands and feet were tied. She couldn't completely avoid the attacks of the Moonlight Pterosaur. When she couldn't avoid it, she could only meet force with force. Fortunately, she had a weapon on her. It was a long sword, which was given to her by Yelu Jing and for self-defense when she received the identity of a new disciple of the Sun Moon sect. Although it wasn't a rare divine weapon, it was still extremely sharp. In addition to the mental power she poured into it, it could cut through gold and jade like tofu. However, her sword did not even leave a white mark on the beast's body. Therefore, Ning Xiuma wanting to use her sword to cut off its head was clearly wishful thinking. After all, it was an Earth-ranked level 8 mythological beast. Its storm-like attacks forced Ning Xiuma into a fluster. There were a few times when she was almost burnt to ashes by the flames it spat out. She was almost chased and beaten up by this guy. She was tortured very badly. Fortunately, she was quick to adapt and had many new ideas in the fight. After suffering several losses, she finally used the incantation of fire that Shinjuli had just taught her. Logically speaking, this kind of spell could only be used when one's psychokinesis of fire reached the earth rank. However, Ning Xuma's psychokinesis of fire was only at the human rank level 5, so the first time she used it, it was only a ball of fire the size of a ping-pong ball. When the small fireball rushed in front of the moonlight pterosaur, it was extinguished by the pterosaur's mouth. Quack, quack, quack. The moonlight pterosaur laughed mockingly, its laughter sounding like 1,000 ducks quacking. Shut up! Di Zun, who was playing chess, was disturbed by it. With a shake of his hand, a ball of blazing white light flew over and entered the moonlight pterosaur's wide, open mouth like lightning. Chapter 917. The moonlight pterosaur jumped 3 feet high, and when it landed on the ground, its entire head was burnt. Naturally, it died. Ning Xuma was so tired that she was panting. She couldn't help but glance at him. Shinjili played a chess piece by himself. Don't worry, I'm not helping you. It's just that it's too noisy. Ning Xuma ignored him. She looked at the moonlight stone in her hand that she had just picked up. All the luster had dissipated. The shining moonlight stone had become an ordinary stone, unremarkable. The difference between moonlight stone and moonlight iron is that after the moonlight pterosaur released by the stone is killed, the moonlight iron's luster will not disappear. Instead, it will become brighter. Shinjili seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. How can I distinguish between moonlight stone and moonlight iron before moving the stones? Ning Xuema didn't want to waste more energy. Before the moonlight pterosaur is killed, it's impossible to distinguish. Shinjili played another chess piece. So you have to be prepared to turn over all the stones in this mountain. Ning Xuema was speechless. She looked at the large and small stones in the mountain, and the corner of her mouth twitched. How long would she have to turn over all these stones? More importantly, how many moonlight pterosaurs would she have to fight with? I forgot to tell you, these moonlight pterosaurs will be more powerful than the previous one. Moreover, if you can't turn over all of them today, these moonlight pterosaurs that you have killed will be reborn. The next day, all the stones will be reshuffled and change positions, but not a single one will be missing. You have to start from the beginning. Shinjili kindly reminded her again. Ning Xuema's mouth twitched even more. This was too perverted. How could she find the moonlight iron properly? What's the ratio of moonlight stone to moonlight iron? Ning Xuema only hoped that the ratio was higher. That way, it would be easier for her. It's hard to say. Shinjili told her the truth. I once studied here for a month. I killed the moonlight pterosaur 30 times, and only found 4 pieces of moonlight iron. Didn't that mean that even if she searched through all the rocks in the valley, she might not be able to find a single piece? Ning Xuema's pretty face turned green from the blow of the truth. No wonder this small piece of moonlight iron was so expensive. It was actually so hard to find. It was even more difficult than winning a lottery ticket. Don't be discouraged. Maybe you'll be so lucky that you'll find one every time you kill a dragon. Try your best. Shinjili comforted her with a few words and went back to playing chess. Ning Xuema wished she could sweep his chessboard. If he had told her about his difficulties earlier, she might have backed out a long time ago, but now she had already bragged. If she couldn't find the moonlight iron, she would be too ashamed to face her elders in Jiangdong. Ning Xuema pursed her small lips. In her heart, she summed up the lesson she had just learned. She steeled her heart and flipped open the second stone that looked quite pleasing to the eye. Then a moonlight pterosaur jumped out. Because of the lesson she learned from fighting with the first moonlight pterodactyl, Ning Xuema wasn't so embarrassed this time. She was no longer chased by the moonlight pterodactyl. When she used the psychokinesis of fire again, the fireball she released began to grow bigger and bigger. It grew from the size of a ping-pong ball to the size of a steamed bun. Although it still couldn't cause any substantial damage to the moonlight pterodactyl, it could at least make it hesitate a little. In this way, she fought with the moonlight pterodactyl for a full 2 hours. The moonlight pterodactyl still couldn't defeat and tear apart this delicate-looking little girl. Chapter 918. The moonlight pterosaur was very unhappy and couldn't help but roar at the sky. But halfway through its roar, it was interrupted by a ball of white light flying towards it. The white light suppressed its roar back into its throat with an overwhelming attack. So, the second moonlight pterosaur couldn't get up again. Ning Xuema threw away the stone that had turned into an ordinary stone in her hand and looked at Shunjuli again. "Those who disturb me will be killed." Shunjuli spat out such a cold sentence and continued to play chess. Ning Xuema let out a sigh of relief and sat down on a rock that looked quite safe. Although she was exhausted from fighting with such a strong opponent, her battle experience increased rapidly, and the fire psychokinesis in her body was also flowing faster. She closed her eyes and adjusted her inner breath for a while. Then, she stood up again, moved her hands and feet, and opened the third moonlight stone. Just like that, she fought with the moonlight pterosaurs one by one. As her battle experience increased, the small fireball she released became bigger and bigger. When she fought with the fifth moonlight pterosaur, a circle of faint red light suddenly appeared around her body. Her fire psychokinesis that had been stagnant finally leveled up. This was simply like fighting monsters to level up. Ning Xuema looked at Shunjuli. He actually brought her here to level up, right? After all, people's potential would be completely stimulated in a fight. It was also the fastest to level up, and the skills that were cultivated would be the most firmly remembered. In fact, the 5 moonlight pterosaurs were all killed by the Almighty's big moves in the end. It was all when she was about to lose or when she was most tired. The reasons he casually came up with were all kinds of strange. They were noisy, the wind from the fan blew on him, the fire from the breath made him hot. After killing the 5th moonlight pterosaur, Ning Xuema ran to Shunjuli and sat in front of him. "Almighty, I'm hungry." She was sweating all over, her hair was a little messy, and her pretty face was even a little dirty. But her eyes were as bright as stars, and her cheeks were rosy. Shunjuli's eyes flickered as he waved his hand. "Come here." Ning Xuema had been taken advantage of by him several times, so she wasn't willing to be fooled again. She was afraid that he would pull her into his arms and kiss her until the sky turned dark again. Her tofu had already been taken advantage of by him countless times. If he continued to take advantage of her, she would become tofu dregs. She sat where she was and shook her head. "No." Shunjuli pulled out a comb out of nowhere and twirled it around his fingertips. He looked at her and said, "Aren't you thinking too much? I just don't want to see your messy hair." Ning Xuema couldn't help but touch her hair. Yes, it was indeed knotted. She looked at the Almighty again. His clothes were as white as snow, not a single bit out of place. There wasn't even a wrinkle on his clothes, not even a speck of dust. She had just been fighting with a moonlight pterosaur, and the dust had almost covered the sky. This guy could still be so perfect in the middle of the battlefield, which made her feel intoxicated. Ning Xuema didn't stand on ceremony with him. She walked over and squatted beside him. She turned around and faced him with the back of her head. "Thank you." She felt at ease and let him comb her hair. Under normal circumstances, if a super insecure person was willing to show her back to you without hesitation, it proved that she trusted you. Shunjuli looked down at her defenseless appearance, and a touch of gentleness flashed through his eyes. He first used a cleaning spell on her body to make her look as clean as if she had just taken a shower. Then, he raised his hand to comb her hair. Chapter 919. The teeth of the comb touched Ning Xuema's scalp from time to time, and it had a massage effect, making her feel very comfortable. The comb went all the way to her hair, and it lasted for a long time. The comb went all the way to her tail, and it was harmonious and beautiful. Ning Xuema suddenly thought of a few folk songs, and then she was embarrassed. It seemed to be a wedding song, and it was a blessing for the couple to be united. The Almighty just couldn't stand her being dirty, so he was just combing her hair. Why did she suddenly think of that? Ning Xuema's hair was originally just casually tied up behind her back. It didn't look good, but it was neat and convenient for fighting. Now, Shunjuli had tied her hair into a slanted bun. She looked cute and charming at the same time. Shunjuli had brought a lot of things with him, so he casually took out a mirror and gave it to her. Take a look. Is it pleasing to the eye? Of course it was pleasing to the eye. Ning Xiaomo looked at her exquisite hair and was very satisfied. She couldn't help but straighten her body and pounce on him. She gave him a loud kiss on the side of his face. Great! A kiss is a reward. Before Shen Julie could react, she had already quickly sat down opposite him. She looked at him with a pair of bright eyes. Almighty, can we eat now? She was starving. Shen Julie raised his hand and touched the place where she had kissed him. His handsome face was calm. Cut corners, so you'll be punished with a meal. Ning Xiaomo was speechless. No, she was so hungry. She blinked her eyes and didn't say anything. She just looked at him pitifully. Shen Julie knocked on the chessboard and said bluntly, There's no use acting cute. I'll give you two choices. 1, play a game with me. If you win, you can eat. 2. His voice paused, and he looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. Don't cut corners. Ning Xiaomo looked at the chessboard and then looked at him. She decisively pounced on him and sincerely kissed him on the other cheek. Is this okay? Just as she was about to get up, he hugged her waist and pressed her into his arms. He gave her a real deep kiss. After a while, he let her get up and said slowly, This is okay. He raised his hand and put away the chessboard. There was a bowl of porridge and a few steaming hot dishes on the stone. Eat! These dishes were all Ning Xiaomo's favorite dishes. What was even more amazing was that these dishes had something that could quickly replenish her physical strength. After she finished eating, she felt that her fatigue had disappeared by more than half, and her strength had returned by quite a bit. Come here. Shen Julie waved at her again. He wouldn't ask her to kiss to the end to kiss him again, would he? Not only did they kiss before the meal, they even wanted to kiss after the meal. Ning Xiaomo was in a good mood, so she decided to satisfy him this time. She happily pounced on him, hugged his neck, and kissed him on the cheek. Is it okay? She had just eaten and hadn't wiped her mouth yet. Her mouth was still a little oily. She treated it as wiping her mouth on his face, so she rubbed against him a few more times. Shen Julie was speechless. He pulled her away from him. Naughty! He pressed her down on the stone in front of him and kept massaging her shoulders and back. It turned out that he asked her to come over to give her a massage to unblock her muscles and bones. Ning Xiaomo closed her eyes and enjoyed his massage. The Almighty's massage was different from the masseur she had seen in her previous life, but it was very accurate. The places where he massaged seemed to be reconnected, and all the soreness disappeared without a trace. Chapter 9:20. The Great God's massage even made Ning Xiaomo's depleted psychokinesis quickly return, making her lively and full again. Shen Julie only massaged for 5 or 6 minutes, but she felt as if she had soaked in a hot bath. Her spirit rejuvenated a lot. After the massage, Ning Xiaomo got up and moved her arms and legs, feeling unprecedentedly carefree. Thank you, Ning Xiaomo couldn't help but say. Having such a master by her side was really her great fortune. You don't have to be so polite with me. Shen Julie looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. Quickly leveling up is important. Go turn over the stones. No one wanted Ning Xiaomo to level up quickly more than the Great God, so that he could quickly meet his requirements. Ning Xiaomo now understood that the Great God brought her here not only to find the Moonlight Iron, but also to let her gain experience. So she turned over the stones again and fought with the Moonlight Pterosaur that jumped out. Shen Julie was still playing chess with himself, waiting for her. If she really couldn't win or if she was in danger, he would help her get rid of the opponent. Time passed in a cycle of killing monsters, eating, and then killing monsters again, and then again. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. In this half a month, the master and disciple didn't go down the mountain at all. There was nothing faster than leveling up in real combat. In just half a month, Ning Xiaomo's martial arts had increased by 1 level. Now, her with psychokinesis was already at Earth rank level 3. Because she frequently used fire spells to attack, the fire psychokinesis in her body had also increased greatly. After half a month, she also broke through to Earth rank and had the strength of Earth rank level 1. The fireball she released was now the size of a basketball, making the Moonlight Pterosaur have scruples. During this period, Julie also took advantage of the situation to teach her a few martial arts. There were self-defense skills, offensive skills, and even music hypnosis. There were all kinds of things, and each of them was aimed at making up for the flaws in her battle. The ancestor was indeed a good master. His eyes were like torches, and he could see Ning Xiaoma's subtle mistakes in battle. He could point them out in time to help her correct them, which benefited Ning Xiaoma a lot. Of course, Dizun didn't serve her for nothing. He took advantage of her every time he taught her martial arts. As a result, Ning Xiaoma's martial arts improved by leaps and bounds, but she was also taken advantage of by Dizun countless times. There was no one on the peak of Moonlight Mountain. There were only the master and disciple duo and the Moonlight Pterosaur that appeared from time to time. There were no other spectators. Therefore, Dizun had no qualms about taking advantage of her. He hugged her in his arms and took advantage of her. He took advantage of her in all kinds of ways. In short, except for the last step, Dizun had already taken advantage of her in every way. There were several times when she almost lost control. Fortunately, Dizun's self-control was extraordinarily strong. He was able to stop in time and let her go to kill the monsters while he sat quietly to calm the surging heat in his chest. 10 days later, Ning Xiaoma finally killed the first Moonlight Pterosaur with her own ability. At the moment when the Moonlight Pterosaur fell down, the stone in Ning Xiaoma's hand quickly shrank to the size of a fingernail, but it was still shining. It was the Moonlight Iron. She finally found a piece of Moonlight Iron. Although the Moonlight Iron was small and light, she was still very excited to find it with her own hands. She excitedly circled around Julie several times, as if she was presenting a treasure to him. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.